yeah, it's completely different to life in Amazon HQ corporate.
And it's also not too different to what you did with medicine, where, you do your study and you do your education and then you go and work in a hospital and you're working around experienced doctors. And
And like the theory is all well and good, but like the first 2 weeks on the job when you realize, oh, this is the dynamic between the nurses and this is how you request a scan and this is how you do all this other stuff that you never...
and here's how you talk to people and here's how long this actually takes. And these little things that, like in a business context, flipping back from medicine, which I know nothing about, just things like, how do you send out like a big bulk email to a list? Or where do you get a list from? Or like, how do you sit down and have a lunch and negotiate a joint venture? So for me, my 2 years doing that when I was 19 to 21, I actually got to sit in on those meetings. So when John was negotiating to do a list swap, you mail your list for our product and we'll mail our list for your product, I'm sitting in on that meeting quietly and going, oh, wow, that's how that happens.
That's the thing, yeah.
Yeah, and when John was proposing, here's what we'll do with the revenue. We'll do a revenue split and this will be the first chunk for costs and we'll take that out first and then and here's how we'll measure it. And it's like, oh, right, okay, that's just a meeting that you have and you just agree that in the meeting and then you write it down and confirm it and then you put it in the heads of terms.
Yeah.
Okay, now I get it.
Yeah, I think there's so much stuff like this where until you've had experience in a thing, it's hard to even fathom what goes on. Like this weekend, I was at this like philanthropy conference-y type thing where there were people from like nuclear policy making and like grant making, and I was asking all the basic questions. I was like what does it mean to like lobby a congressman? And they're like, oh, you literally queue up and then you literally give the money for it. And wait, what? That's a thing? And like, how do you contact a government official? Do you just like Google their name? And they're like, well, no, it's opaque for a reason and you have to do this. You have to, like, it's just completely mind blowing that this whole world of like government and policy and grants and philanthropy that I have zero experience in. And like, I can read all the books, but I wouldn't know how to contact a government official.
Yeah.
Unless I know someone who is literally doing the thing.
Yeah. And you hear these fancy titles. It's like, oh, I'm an analyst with KPMG or Goldman Sachs. And it's like, but what do you actually do? Oh, I get given a list of these people and then I have to go and put these spreadsheets together. Oh okay. Yeah.
Okay. So you're 21. You've started your own, I guess, lead generation company. Okay. So is this like, let's say I am an estate agent and I want to sell houses.
I'll give you some real examples. We worked with financial planners. We worked with franchisors. One of the biggest deals we did was with franchisors who wanted to sell franchises. And what we'd do is a roadshow of events introducing their franchise to potential franchisees. Now, as a $60,000 franchise, we would get 15% of the franchise success fee as our marketing fee.
Okay.
So they paid us an amount that covered costs first, and then we got 15% success fee on top of that. So that was a great deal. They'd put a lot of energy and effort into creating a franchise. When I met them, I went to a franchise expo and there were 300 franchisors all trying to say that they had the best franchise. And
franchisors as in like Five Guys, McDonald's, KFC would be a franchisor.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
And like those are like McDonald's is the biggest well-known franchise. They sell you the rights to run their business. But there's all sorts of little franchises like mortgage broking franchises and even things like gardening franchises and cleaning franchises.
Yeah.
So you basically, I go along to a franchise expo and I see that there's 300 franchisors trying to stand out and be different. And I go, this doesn't work for anyone, because if you're a customer thinking about buying a franchise, you've now got way too many choices. And if you're a franchisor, you're just standing right next to 300 competitors. So it's just feeling too weird, like it feels too saturated. So we just basically approached one that I thought was great, and we negotiated a deal, and we did a roadshow where instead of them being shoulder to shoulder with competitors, we would put them in front of 50 people who were potential customers.
How would you find these 50 people?
So we'd advertise, do direct mail campaigns. We would do, there was something called fax broadcasting at the time.
Fax broadcasting. Okay.
Let's not even go. I'd have to even begin by telling your audience what a fax machine is.
Just a quick message from one of our sponsors and we'll get right back to the episode. And this episode is very kindly brought to you by Heights.
Heights is a brain care smart supplement. It is 2 capsules that you take every day. I've been taking it for the last 12 months, and it contains over 20 evidence-based micronutrients that you need to keep your brain and body healthy. Like I said, I've been taking Heights every day for the last 12 months, and through that, I've actually become friends with the founder, Dan, who we actually had on season 1 of this podcast. And this season, we also have an interview with neuroscientist and psychiatrist Tara Swart, who is the chief science officer at Heights as well. And one of the things I love about Heights is the fact that every single thing they do is very evidence-based. Over on their blog, on their website, they've got tons of articles along with links to all of the different papers that they've cited that show all the benefits of the various micronutrients that they've got in these 2 little capsules. And the best thing about taking these is that it's just 2 little capsules every morning, so you don't have to deal with green sludge or any other kind of faffery. It's just literally taking 2 pills. It's super easy to sign up. You just go on the website, you put in your address, and they send you either a monthly or a quarterly subscription. I sign up to the quarterly one myself because A, it's cheaper, and B, I'd have to take fewer deliveries. And if you use the coupon code ULI15 at checkout, that will give you 15% off the already discounted price of the quarterly subscription, so you can try out Heights to your heart's content. So thank you so much, Heights, for sponsoring this episode and for helping improve my own brain care. Just a quick message from one of our sponsors, and we'll get right back to the episode. And this episode is very kindly brought to you by Shortform. Shortform is the world's best service that summarizes books, but it's way more than just book summaries. They almost have a whole study guide for every book that they've got on the platform, where they've got a 1-page summary, and then they also have chapter by chapter breakdowns. And it's not just chapter by chapter breakdowns. Also, in between the chapter breakdowns, they have interactive exercises where you can engage more readily with the ideas in the book. Shortform covers non-fiction books from a bunch of different genres that you might be interested in. For example, they've got a load of stuff in the business world. So if, for example, you're an entrepreneur or you want to become an entrepreneur, that'll be great for you. They've got books in motivation, they've got books in education, they've got books in lifestyle and communication. Basically, any genre of like non-fiction, personal development-y, self-helpy stuff that will help you level up your life. It's all there on Shortform. Shortform publishes new book guides and articles every week. And if you're a subscriber, then you get to vote on what book they cover next. And in fact, through that system, I have voted for various books that they've then turned into summaries. For example, one book I recently revisited is in fact Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Now, I read this book ages and ages and ages ago, I think when I was in school or university, and it really shaped the way that I approach my views of money. But to be honest, the book is kind of basic and it's somewhat out of date. But revisiting the short form summary of it meant that I could revisit the sort of abstracted lessons without having to deal with all of the, the tone of the book. No offense to Robert, is a little bit too brash. Whereas a short form summary is in a way a nicer way of getting the same ideas. Anyway, if any of that sounds up your street and you would like to sign up to the world's best service that summarizes books, then head over to shortform.com/deep dive, and that will give you a completely free 5-day trial, and you can try out the service to your heart's content. That link will also be in the video description and in the show notes. And thank you so much, Shortform, for sponsoring this episode. So you as the marketing agency are trying to, you're putting it out in a newspaper being like, do you have 20 grand to spare? Have you thought about starting a franchise?
Well, no, we would do. See, that's the mistake. So what most big companies do is they promote their core business. Do you want to buy a franchise?
Okay.
So that's
not what you want to do.
No, what we want to do is we want to create an introduction that is a low risk first step. And it's not necessarily about I'll give you an example from when we worked with a financial planning company. So they were marketing, do you want financial planning? And what we would do is run events on, do you want to understand the current market? Do you want to know what the current trends are? Do you want to hear from a financial planning expert to explain what's going on in the current market? So an introduction event is just a low risk first step to introduce the idea. Now, anyone who turns up to that event, clearly they have an interest in solving a problem. But what we're not doing is saying, do you want to buy my stuff?
Yeah, okay. So you give them essentially a load of free value at the event, or very cheap value, and then some proportion of those will be like, oh, by the way, this...
Exactly. So, by the way, if you would like to talk to one of our financial planners, there's a diary up the back of the room and you can book a meeting one-to-one and just head up and put your name in the diary, and there's all the slots are highlighted that you can go and just fill your name literally with a pen and paper. And that was a big part of what we did, right? So it was putting on an interesting speaker, and getting 50 to 100 people to come along to that, and then inviting people to put their name in the diary.
And then you either get paid based on how many people put the name in the diary, or how many of those then convert to a paid customer for the financial planner.
Yep. Yep. So we would do a combination of success fees based on leads or sales.
Wow. Okay. So when you were
21, now, mind you, we're going way back in time. I'm 41 now, so we're talking.
So you start this lead generation marketing business, and you said you were doing sort of 10 million plus?
We got to 10.7 million, yeah.
Within how long?
3 years.
Bloody hell. How did that feel as a 24-year-old at the time doing that kind of numbers?
It was pretty wild. It was a lot of stress. We had a huge team. Well, when I say huge team, we had about 20 of us working out of a massive 7-bedroom house. I was 24. I was buying like a brand new BMW X5, which I wasn't able to really even insure, and things like that.
Yeah.
I traveled constantly, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. I stayed in 5-star hotels and ate in Michelin star restaurants because we were taking clients out and all of those kind of things. Sometimes I would be staying in Sydney and wouldn't bother checking out of the hotel because I was ducking down to Melbourne for one night. And it was crazy. We were doing $1 million a month in sales. And we were very profitable. So it was a pretty amazing first start to life. One of the lessons I got from my first mentor, John, is that success it can happen quite quickly, right? It doesn't have to be this long road that actually, if you tap into a trend, you can push the door and it can fling right open. So a lot of the message that entrepreneurs get is that, you've got to really grind it out and you've got to crawl across glass and then you can make $1 and then you can make $10. And, we did a couple of million in the first year with John, and then we were doing 6 million in year 2. So it was in my head that it can happen quite quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, because that very much is the prevailing entrepreneur narrative. And that's certainly the narrative I peddle when it comes to creators and like YouTubers and stuff, where
compounding.
Yeah, compounding and long-term growth. And if you expect revenue within 6 months as a YouTuber, it's like, you might be kind of aiming for the wrong sorts of things. In what way is like the entrepreneurship stuff different to that?
So there are some businesses that are compounding businesses, and there are businesses that are what's called a J-curve. A J-curve is where it loses money before it goes up.
Okay.
So, and that's the shape of the cash flow is the J, right? That's what the J stands for. It doesn't stand for anything that begins with J. It's the shape of losing money and then making money. So that's called a J-curve business. And a J-curve business a lot of the time is like technology. So let's say you spend $1 million building something of tech related, and then you sell it for $10 a month, right? I keep jumping between dollars and pounds. But you would have what's called a naturally occurring J-curve. You've spent all this money to build something, and now you've got someone paying $10 a month. Now you've got 10 people paying $10 a month. So now the J-curve starts.
And now you're compounding.
And and hopefully you get to the point where, when we hit 5,000 people, then we break even. And then when we hit 10,000, it's all profit. And, so that's the J-curve. And the uptick of the J is what you're hoping for. That's why you're in it in the first place. But you've got to get through the J. So that's a lot of business models are naturally occurring J-curves.
Yeah.
Setting up a restaurant is a J-curve.
Like large expense to set it up, and then you need to hit a certain threshold of customers to break even.
Yeah, you've got to hit volumes,
yeah.
Right? So a restaurant, the average spend might be $30 per person. So you've got to have a lot of people coming. So that's a J-curve business. There are other businesses that are not necessarily J-curves. Like, for example, consulting. You could sign up one consulting client who spends $80,000 a year with you. And like you've got almost no overhead. And straight away you're consulting, and let's say you get 4 clients and now you're making, hundreds of thousands, and you have very little overhead, and you might hire an assistant, or you might, do something like that. You might work on their site. So for example, I know people who are consultants to manufacturing companies, and they optimize the manufacturing process, and they actually look for what's called lean systems, and they get paid hundreds of thousands to go and do manufacturing consulting. They work on site, very low overheads. That's not a J-curve business.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So two thoughts on this. I think the business of, quote, being a content creator or doing the YouTube channel or whatever thing is definitely a J-curve business. Even if you're not spending any money on it, it's definitely a J-curve in terms of the time, because you're a massive, sinking so much time into the thing
and
before
not getting anything back.
Exactly, before you hit the monetization threshold. And now all of those assets that you've spent years building up are now still compounding, and then you get to stupid levels. But it's like people get disgruntled and discouraged because they're sinking in the time, generally while they're a student or while they've got a full-time job, and they're not seeing a return straight away. Whereas, and I think it's a lot less like, I listen to a bunch of business podcasts, and I generally don't hear about non-J-curve businesses. Like I've got a friend from university who does this manufacturing consulting for fashion companies because he's into like AI and sort of coding and stuff and loves fashion and understands how fashion supply chain works, and gets like stupidly large amounts of money for a single consulting arrangement. And he's just making money. He doesn't have an audience. He's not trying to do the whole YouTube thing. He's just making money from day one.
Exactly.
And you just don't hear about those sorts of businesses. And so people who are like, oh, I want to maybe start a business on the side, automatically feel like, oh, I have to sink 2 years of free work into this thing before I can make money.
Yeah, and you do if it's a J-curve, but not if it's not. So typically the difference is the sales process. So a J-curve business normally relies on almost a frictionless sale where people either do a free piece of content, or they do a free trial, or they sit down at a restaurant expecting to spend, $30 or something like that. So it's fairly frictionless. The non-J-curve businesses normally have a sales process. So you're sitting down with a potential client and you're actually convincing them to part with a sizable chunk of cash. And normally it would be thousands to tens of thousands per sale. And you need to generate leads, and then you need to make the sale. So you have to, sit down with that fashion business and say, look, here's how your current system works. Here's some of the best practices that you're leaving off the table. And you might sell an initial scope of work that is like fact find or something like that. And then you present that and you come back, and now you're presenting a piece of work. That can also turn into a boutique. So you could have 3 to 12 people working together doing supply chain consulting together. And all of that, everyone can be making great money, in those types of businesses. So anything that involves a sales process is normally a non-J-curve business.
Interesting. Where does a freelancer fit into this?
Yeah, so freelancer is self-employed, and it's not a model that I think is a great model. So you're essentially chief cook and bottle washer. You're doing strategy and implementation and finance and scheduling and all of that sort of stuff. And essentially what you're doing is you're charging a premium because people don't have to commit to a long package. So what tends to work entrepreneurially is to not get caught up as a freelancer selling your own labor. All right, let's just zoom out a little bit. The school system teaches us to be component labor. So when we go to school, right, the whole thing is about, everything is based off the Industrial Revolution model, and most people end up as a component in a larger system. So we get taught how to become a piece of component labor. So when we freelance, we're essentially selling ourselves as component labor to someone else who has a bigger outcome in mind, right? But we're just doing that ad hoc. Now, the trick about being an entrepreneur is to separate from the mindset of being component labor and to actually move across to being outcome focused and looking at what is the customer trying to get done? What does the customer want? Why is that customer buying this? What's the payoff for them? Radical empathy with the customer. And then saying, I will build you a solution that you want, and I will find the components, whatever they are, and I'll put those together and sell you that. And
it may well be you doing the thing at the start, but they don't have to know that?
You could potentially be a piece of labor. However, the better option is to have some expertise such that you know how to organize other people's labor, so that you, like, if you've got the knowledge of how, let's use this as an example, right? If you've got the knowledge of how supply chains should function, you should be able to organize a team of 3 or 4 people who know how to optimize that, and you should be able to select the right people. And then you're better off actually being the key person of influence up on stage, telling stories, winning the deals, writing a book about it, putting a podcast out there about it, and then having a team who deliver the actual outcome. But the trick is that you want to, as quick as possible, avoid being a component in somebody else's system and actually be someone who stands for an outcome and someone who's an expert in either talking about that outcome, selling that outcome, overseeing that outcome, putting together teams that know about that outcome, etc.
And so let's say, so just to use a concrete example, I know a bunch of people who are interested in writing. They've maybe done like English degrees or something, don't really want to, maybe they've tried consulting for a year or two and freaking hate it. And they love the idea of, live my dream remote digital nomad life, work from anywhere, type stuff on my laptop, become a quote freelance writer would be how, like the default path would be I need to get a normal job. The next to default path would be I should become a freelance writer. But it sounds like how would you be thinking about that to maybe think more entrepreneurially?
So let's start with the downside. The downside is that sounds lovely and we love thinking about doing the work. So the freelance writer loves the idea of sitting in Bali with the laptop and doing the freelance writing. One of the issues is that in order to do the work we love, we have to win the work that we love. So now you're asking the question, well, okay, I know you can do the writing piece, but are you going to be able to win the significant number of clients necessary in order to do that? Now, for most businesses, winning the clients is going to be 30, 40, 50% of the time. You're going to be constantly hustling for a client. So what you can do if you're a freelancer is you could try and find 4 or 5 companies that need regular work, and you split your time between them. And really what you're hoping for is that each one pays a slight premium and that they're not worried about your flexibility, that you can work from Bali. So that's the total upside package that you're looking for, maybe splitting your time between 4.
And you're hoping for a retainer or something, so you've got like regular income coming in. And
whereas you might have been paid 50 grand, if you split it up between several, you might get 60 or 70 grand, right? And you might get time flexibility or that sort of thing. So it's okay. The downsides are significant. You don't have a real career path unless you invent one, and you can easily have, lack motivation because you're not in an environment that's dictating, a level of performance. You're having to create those elements yourself. You can get caught up in things like finances and paying taxes and
chasing up invoices,
chasing invoices, all of those things. Suddenly you realize that you've got all of the downsides of having a business without the upside scalability. You've got all of the downsides of having a job without the security of a job. All right, so freelancing to me is not necessarily a great idea because it comes with a lot of the downsides without the upsides.
Okay. So using this writer example, how might they level up their thinking and think more entrepreneurially?
Well, you could create a writing agency. You could create packages of content, intellectual property that you've created that you can then resell and on-sell. You could create your own written assets, which get used in any number of ways. So you can create licensable assets. So there is stuff like that. The difference is, though, you have to stop thinking like a technician. A technician is someone who's going to component labor. They're going to, do a job for money. You've got to start thinking about an entrepreneur, which is what problem am I trying to solve in the world? So it all starts. As an entrepreneur, you're kind of asking the question, what is the problem I'm trying to solve in the world? Like, there's a group of people out there, they've got an unmet need, they're frustrated, there's something that they're not happy about, and then I'm going to come along and solve that holistically for them. I'm going to come up with a full solution, full and remarkable solution for them, and that's going to solve that for them. And I'm going to organize labor, systems, IP, technology, all of that's going to be organized, and we're going to put that together. So...
Yeah. So I'm not thinking, I want to be a freelance writer. I'm thinking, what is the problem that I can solve?
Well, the problem, the issue is, if you're a freelance writer thinking about, I'm a freelance writer and here's what I want to do, you're your own customer. You're thinking about your own needs and your own problems. And that's the opposite to where entrepreneurs need to think. Entrepreneurs need to park their own needs and their own problems in order to research what somebody else needs.
So in your example of going to this franchise or expo, realizing that, hey, there's 300 people out there, instead of thinking, I want to be a lead gen person running events, you were thinking, what is the problem that these guys have? And how can I build a business to solve that problem?
Yeah. So I was marrying up a set of skills that I had acquired and a business model that I knew with looking at these people really clearly frustrated that we've paid all this money to come to this show and we're just surrounded by competitors.
Okay. And so what was your relationship to money like around that time, if you can remember? Sort of age 19, you start working for this startup, you're earning a salary, and then suddenly you're sort of making like millions doing your own thing.
Yeah. So as a university student, I was properly broke. To the extent that I would, go to the butcher and see if they had offcuts that were going cheap that day. And I would go to the veggie store and get a box of like horrible vegetables that were, going like for $2 a box. I was a Pizza Hut delivery driver on $3 a delivery. I was late night barman. I was doing door-to-door sales for a roof insulation company, setting appointments. Like, I was doing whatever I could to just simply survive. And I would work. If I wasn't doing uni, I was working, and I was like completely just trying to optimize every spare moment and making maybe like $1,000, maybe $1,500 a month, just enough to cover rent. And I was living with 5 people in a 3-bedroom house. So all of those sorts of things. So I had a real, the evidence that I had was that money was very scarce, very hard to come by, and that, this was something that was just how it was, right? Everyone I knew was in that position as well. So one of the questions that happened with my mentor was, he said to me, Daniel, how much do you think is a lot of money? And I said, $52,000 a year, right? If you earn $1,000 a week, I remember saying, there's not much you can't do on $1,000 a week. And he kind of laughed and he said, Daniel, I'm going to put you in a sales role and you're going to get 10% per sale. And if you're only making $520,000 a year worth of sales, I'm going to fire you because that's way too little. He's like, I need you to be making like 1.2 million a year worth of sales, and you need to be earning 120,000 a year. And I'm like, what? And this was kind of radical. But he said to me, Dan, I think you need to adjust your psychology around money. He said, I want you to bring me, I think it was 1,000, maybe 2,000. I want you to bring me $1,000 tomorrow in cash. And I'm like, why? And he's like, you'll see. So I had a little bit of cash in the bank, and I think I might have borrowed some from Dad. I used to run these nightclub parties in university, and like everyone paid in cash, and I had like a little stash of cash. So I kind of brought him $1,000, and it was like a lot of money. It was all my money, right? So he grabs a clip, bulldog clip, and he says, carry that in your pocket at all times. I want you to always have $1,000 in your pocket. And I was like, oh, okay. So for the first couple of weeks, I'm walking around like, this is very dangerous, and ninjas are going to come and get me, and people will judge me, and all this sort of stuff. And I think I'd gotten it in $100 notes at that point. So I've got like 10 $100 notes in my pocket. And what was interesting is about 2 weeks or 3 weeks in, my brain starts to adjust that $1,000 is just pocket money. It's just the kind of money you carry on you. And my energy towards money just shifted very rapidly. So when I first was doing sales calls and I would say, this is $2,000, it was like my energy towards $2,000 is like, I'm asking you for your kidney.
Yep.
And then a couple of weeks later, it's like, oh, it's, pocket money. It's not like my nonverbal communication, my energy towards money just shifted so radically just by carrying a bunch of it. So several things happened. It brought up to the surface all of the issues that I had around money. So I'm going to be judged. If I've got money, people will judge me because I'm thinking, what if somebody sees it? What if they think I'm some sort of high roller or something? What if I'm paying for something and someone sees my money clip? And then it brought up, if you have money, people will attack you. So that was another psychology of money. It's like you're going to be attacked for having money, physically harmed. And the other one was like, money's really hard to come by. It's a very scarce resource. And it's like, getting it is really hard and you have to hold on to it. So all of this kind of bubbles up to the surface. And the other one was, what if a girl wants to date me because she thinks I've got lots of money, but I don't have money? So it was this whole idea of like, my only value as a man is like my having money. So all of that is like bubbling. And then because it's bubbling up to the surface, you're able to think about it and process it and think, oh, is that the belief I want to have? Is that something I like thinking? So it was a trigger for dealing with money issues very rapidly. And mind you, $1,000 back in 2001, 2002 was significantly more. If you want to do the activity today, you probably need a couple of thousand. There's inflation. In fact, it's going up 10% a year.
Quite, yeah. So let's add 10% to that number. Sounds like a pretty cool mentor.
He was great. Yeah.
Did you have any other lessons that he taught you in a sort of somewhat weird manner?
Well, I'll give you two.
Yeah.
One was no news. So I was completely banned from the news. And he basically said, look, the news is just statistically irrelevant things that they present to you on a daily basis. You know, they're not going to report to you that a plane landed safely. They're not going to report to you that, you know, people woke up and went to work and had a lovely day. It's only going to be the statistically irrelevant things, the things that happen to 1 in 100,000 people. That's the only stuff that you're going to read in the news. The second thing about the news is none of it is anything you can do anything about. So you might think it's absolutely horrible what's happening in a particular place or a particular situation. That's not, you've got no ability to influence that. So get on with what you have the ability to do. Build your own platform, build your own life, and then you might have the ability to influence more stuff. So one of his rules was a complete blackout on any form of news, newspapers, radio, television, just completely gone. And that is quite freeing as well, right? Frees up time, frees up headspace, frees up negative emotions. So that was great. And then the big lesson I got from John was everything is downstream from lead generation. So you can't build a business if you can't generate leads. If you can have a big audience, but if they can't signal that they're interested in something, you can't build a business. You could have an amazing product that you've spent 10 years developing. If you can't get people to signal their interest in that, you've got no business. So his thing was everything is downstream from lead generation. Almost everything I learned over those 2 years was just lead generation. It was all about how do you generate warm leads. And there was dozens of different ways that we would go with, and we'd constantly, the whole business was this idea of lead generation. And what was interesting about it is that when we would blow up a client's business, it was just we turned the lead generation tab on. Nothing else changed. You could have a financial planning business where they've been in business for 15 years and they're struggling month to month and they're really good at what they do, but their business isn't growing rapidly. You blow up the leads. You put on 40 events, introduction to the markets, introduction to investing, and then that business just goes boom, and it blows up in no time. So everything's downstream from lead generation. I literally watched our clients' lives completely change because we turned on the lead generation tab.
Yeah, this is sparking so many thoughts in my mind around our own business and how the first time we kind of really sold something. This was before I read Oversubscribed. It was our kind of high ticket course, and we just sort of launched it expecting I don't know.
They present to you on a daily basis. They're not going to report to you that a plane landed safely. They're not going to report to you that, people woke up and went to work and had a lovely day. It's only going to be the statistically irrelevant things, the things that happen to 1 in 100,000 people. That's the only stuff that you're going to read in the news. The second thing about the news is none of it is anything you can do anything about. So you might think it's absolutely horrible what's happening in a particular place or a particular situation. That's not, you've got no ability to influence that. So get on with what you have the ability to do. Build your own platform, build your own life, and then you might have the ability to influence more stuff. So one of his rules was a complete blackout on any form of news, newspapers, radio, television, just completely gone. And that is quite freeing as well, right? Frees up time, frees up headspace, frees up negative emotions. So that was great. And then the big lesson I got from John was everything is downstream from lead generation. So you can't build a business if you can't generate leads. If you can have a big audience, but if they can't signal that they're interested in something, you can't build a business. You could have an amazing product that you've spent 10 years developing. If you can't get people to signal their interest in that, you've got no business. So his thing was everything is downstream from lead generation. Almost everything I learned over those 2 years was just lead generation. It was all about how do you generate warm leads. And there was dozens of different ways that we would go with, and we'd constantly, the whole business was this idea of lead generation. And what was interesting about it is that when we would blow up a client's business, it was just we turned the lead generation tab on. Nothing else changed. You could have a financial planning business where they've been in business for 15 years and they're struggling month to month and they're really good at what they do, but their business isn't growing rapidly. You blow up the leads. You put on 40 events, introduction to the markets, introduction to investing, And then that business just goes and it blows up in no time. So everything's downstream from lead generation. I literally watched our clients' lives completely change because we turned on the lead generation tab.
Yeah, this is sparking so many thoughts in my mind around our own business, and like how, like the first time we kind of really sold something, this was before I read Oversubscribed. It was our kind of high ticket course, and we just sort of launched it expecting, like, I don't know, 12 people to sign up for like a beta testing cohort, and like 354 people signed up. It was just like, bloody hell.
Yeah.
But I think that's because we had 4 years worth of like almost pent up demand for this thing. But then every time we've run it since, it's felt like harder and harder. It's felt like we've exhausted some of the warm audience more and more. And now it feels like we're having to do more to generate those leads. But I guess, like, in my mind, I'm not even thinking of it as lead generation. Yeah.
Ali, imagine this. You've got 3.5 million subscribers. Most people don't have 3,000 people on a database. So whatever you're feeling and experiencing, most small businesses are completely crushed by this problem. This lead generation problem is a crushing problem that impacts every area of their life, prevents them from taking holidays, prevents them from ever switching off on the weekend. You know, so if you take most of those 5 million businesses out there in the UK, the lead generation problem is the big problem. Like, they have no ability to generate leads.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and we'll get right back to the episode. And this episode is very kindly brought to you by Skillshare. If you haven't heard by now, Skillshare is probably the single best place in the world to learn anything online. And the best thing about Skillshare sponsoring this podcast is it's very exciting because I have actually been a teacher on Skillshare since 2019, and I actually have 13 classes on Skillshare. Yes, 13. Most of the online courses I've ever made are on Skillshare, where you can access them completely for free by going to Skillshare.com/deep dive, and you'll get a 1-month free trial. Anyway, on Skillshare, there are thousands of classes on all sorts of topics, from entrepreneurship and business to lifestyle design to interior design to cooking to graphic design to video editing, like loads of stuff. But in particular, you might like to check out my own classes on productivity. I have 3 classes on Skillshare, all about productivity. We have the productivity fundamentals, we have productivity creators, and we have productivity strategies. And so if you want to do more things with your time, if you want to do more of the things that matter to you in a way that's fun and sustainable, you might like to check out those classes, which again, you can check out completely for free by just going to Skillshare.com/deep dive. And then once your trial is over, you can choose to carry on with the subscription. I pay for Skillshare. I think it's great. They've got loads of classes, and so it becomes one of my first places to go to if I want to teach myself anything at all. So check out my classes on Skillshare, and thank you so much, Skillshare, for sponsoring this episode. Your recent book, Scorecard Marketing, kind of talks about that very tactically. Anything else you'd recommend for like helping someone learn the skill?
So all of these skills relate to a broader set of skills, which is entrepreneurship. And some of the skills is understanding why people buy. So, for example, all people buy things to relieve a psychological tension between what they have and what they want. So that is the underlying reason why anyone buys anything. There is some form of a psychological tension. Something's not right in the world. It should be this way, but it's currently this way, and I want to close that gap. So that's the buying process. Now, sometimes people don't have much psychological tension around something, but it could be widened. Some people have a dormant psychological tension, which they're not consciously aware of, or they're not solution seeking. They're just holding on to the problem and holding on to the frustration, but they're not in the process, and you can spark a decision-making process. So the more you understand why people buy and what's going on under the surface, and the fact that there are people actively looking for things, and then there are people who are passively dealing with a frustration or problem but not actively searching. So getting a working understanding of these things is really powerful. The other thing that triggers every single sale is a combination of emotion, logic, and urgency. So I've found that all businesses are only really naturally good at one. So some businesses naturally are good at generating emotion in their customers, but not logic or urgency. Some businesses are really good with the logical side of why you should buy, but they're not very good at the emotion or the urgency. And some businesses are the hard sales business. They turn the screws, and they're all about urgency, but they're not very good at logic or emotion. And great businesses, they understand how to do logic, emotion, and urgency in the right doses, and they get the minimum effective dose across nicely. And people go, oh, I'm excited to buy. I love buying from this company. Like an Apple would be a great example. They give you logic, emotion, urgency.
They have the pre-order for the pre-order, and I'm just like, oh yeah, this is so good. I can prepare my pre-order so that when 1 p.m. comes around, I can just hit the button, and it's just
they do a great combination of like educating you about the phone combined with showing you stories of people who are out there taking amazing photos and they look really cool.
Yeah.
And it's all woven in together, and then there's a moment to act. So logic, emotion, urgency, all coming together at once.
So how do you learn these skills?
Well, I've written about them. You can read Oversubscribed and Scorecard Marketing. Those are two great books on that. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. But there's some other things you can do. You can survey your customers, right? So you want to be able to ask lots of questions about why people are buying from you or not buying from you. You want to ask people questions where they quantify. As a doctor, you probably asked people on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad does it hurt?
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, it's a 4. Okay, so it's not as bad as I thought, right? Oh, it's bearable. Or it's like, oh, it's a 9. It's like, okay, well, wow, that's pretty intense. So asking people to quantify with a number is really powerful because that is logic and emotion coming together. So when people feel something and quantify it with a number, they're integrating their left and their right brain, and they're giving you very clear signals and feedback as to what's going on. So some of the questions that are super powerful to talk to your market about is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how motivated would you be to solve this problem? On a scale of 1 to 10, how frustrated are you by this, right? Because you're looking for things that people rate highly as a frustration if it's a dormant need. On a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you with your existing, solutions? So these are the kind of questions, and then you're trying to use that data to figure out, well, what is the solution that I can build that really helps people move from a low score to a high score on these types of things. I know this is getting a little bit geeky, but conducting research of just 30 people is often very revealing. It tells you a lot about what you are doing right or not doing right. Some more research is pretty powerful.
One thing that I used to have a big hang up about, and probably still do a little bit, is that sales and marketing equals bad. It's evil. It's like a bit icky. It's a bit scammy. And there was a lot of, I think, unlearning I had to do when selling our course for the first time 2 years ago now. Is this, and it's definitely a sentiment I've heard from a lot of people that, I just hate the idea of sales. I hate the idea of marketing. What's going on there?
I totally agree. When you're a creator, when you're building something and you put your heart and soul into it, the idea that you have to then justify that and that you have to convince people to do it, it's kind of like, weirdly like trying to sell your best friend to someone, or like, it's kind of like this weird thing that you want it to be self-evidently valuable. You want to be able to create something and people self-evidently just know about it and love it and all of that. And that's just not how humans work, right? So humans have to go through a process of discovery, and we have to get to know something, which is all about understanding the logic. We have to get to trust something, which is the emotional connection of like, yeah, I've done enough research, right? And then we want to basically, we like it, we trust it, we feel a sense that now's the right time. So we're going through this process of discovery, and it doesn't really matter what the product is, whether it be, camera equipment or musical equipment or any of those sorts of things. We like to do our research, and we like to go through a series of steps of getting to know things. So the evidence-based research on this is from Professor Robin Dunbar and from Google. And they say that you go through 11 touch points before you buy something based on your Google search history. And Professor Robin Dunbar says you go through about 7 hours of contact before you feel a sense of trust. So if you just simply think about what is marketing there to do, it's there to accelerate that journey at scale with more people to help guide them through a process of discovery so that they get to know about something, like it, trust it, learn about it, right? You're helping them to discover and research it. Unfortunately, there is a part of every sale that is urgency, and this is the ickiest part that most people hate, which is trying to tell people that now's the right time to buy something. So I don't think many people have a problem with communicating the emotional payoff of their product, that it's going to feel great and that it's going to be a really enjoyable thing. I don't think people have much of a problem talking about the logic. Sometimes they do, because logic is about quantifying and return on investment, and this is the cost to benefit analysis, right? This is why you would do it. But then what people want to do is they want to be able to say, okay, when you're ready, come back and buy. But humans are humans. What do? They forget and they go find something else and all of that. So we need an urgency trigger. Urgency is a little bit like a spice than an ingredient. You don't want to overuse it, but there needs to be a subtext of urgency. Now, for most products, the only viable subtext of urgency that works is genuinely being oversubscribed. So genuinely being oversubscribed means that there are plenty of people who want this. There is genuinely a limited number available, or there's a start date. There's a reason that you need to begin. And unfortunately, it's only going to be available for this number of people. Now, what the perfect scenario is that there's some form of demand and supply tension that's transparent.
Yep.
So, for example, if there's a lineup out the front of the restaurant, it must be a good restaurant and you must need to book ahead. If there is, if Apple phones sell out in the first week and then you have to wait and it's a delay, okay, so if I don't buy, then I'm going to have to be the person who gets it 3 months from now. So the subtext of demand and supply tension and some form of transparency that we can see that transparently, there's a lot of people who want this, there's only a limited number, or there's a start time.
Yeah.
Okay, I better do this.
Yeah. Yeah, with my first business, when I was 19 and selling courses to help people get into med school, we did, and I'm not sure how ethical this was, but we would artificially sell out or like deliberately book smaller venues for places that we knew like wouldn't have that much demand. And so when we sold 7 seats, it's like sold out. And no one has to know it was only sold out of 7, but they just see sold out and some CSS stuff to make it look red and like, and that seemed to just work.
Well, yeah. Here's the frustrating thing about humans. The frustrating thing is that taking no action is actually quite safe, and most people kind of have a subconscious belief that if I don't take action, then nothing really bad can go wrong. But if I do take action, then something might go wrong. So it's unfortunate, but there's no successful businesses that are long-term successful that don't do something around creating an urgency queue for buying, right? And if they don't do logic, emotion, and urgency, they're normally not profitable. So you get a lot of businesses that they turn over money, but they're not very profitable. Airlines, for example. So can you imagine if there was such thing as a profit god who handed out profit fairly, and they looked at every business model and they said, only the business models that are really hard to operate and really important to society, those will get the profit. And anyone who's just superfluous, you don't get any profit. So you look at the airline industry and you say, you've got to have 100% safety, hugely capital intensive, customer service expectations are through the roof. Logistics, you've got to leave on time, finish on land on time. If you're a minute late, we're going to start charging you a fee, a penalty. And you think, wow, what an incredibly complex business model. I bet the profit gods would give them 50% profit margins. It's like, no, it's like 5 to 10% profit margins. It's nothing. Why? Simply because there's freely available. There's always seats available. You can buy a ticket when you want. If you miss this one, there'll be another one going in an hour. Right, so all of that's built into it. Let's have a look at the opposite. The opposite is Rolex.
Yep.
Right? So Rolex is a business that has barely innovated its product in many years. A Rolex today looks much the same as a Rolex 50 years ago. It's made from the same materials. It's made pretty much in the same way, in the same place. So there's hardly any innovation. They're terrible at customer service. The product itself can be easily copied. A copy can cost 1/10 to 1/20th of an actual real article. But here's the difference. Rolex has a waiting list of 18 months to get a genuine Rolex. And when they call you, they say, we've got your watch available, but we can only hold it for you for 3 days. If not, you'll miss out on it and you'll go back on the waiting list for 18 months. Now, Rolex is massively profitable, something like 70% margins. So, this is the difference between being oversubscribed, logic, emotion, urgency. Actually, and I will say this, Rolex has logic, emotion, and urgency. The emotion is status and achievement and significance and marking a significant occasion. The logic is that they hold their value. They're incredibly good hedge against inflation. There are people who buy Rolexes and keep them in a drawer purely as a store of wealth. And the urgency is that there's an 18-month waiting list. So when you bring it all together, explosive.
Nice. Okay, so the mentor, John, these 3 big lessons: the value of money, no news is good, and everything is downstream of lead generation. So what happened next in your story? So you're 24, you're doing 10 million a year in this company. You've got a team of 20 people. You're doing marketing for other businesses.
Yeah, so we were pretty concentrated with one major client. I had a big falling out with that client. They were going to acquire us, and then they did a really nasty negotiation tactic. And I threw my toys out the pram and basically said, deal's off. I'm moving to London. I'm going to go do something else.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because I was 24, 25. I mean, it's funny because I walked away from tens of millions in that sale. And they had disrespected me and tried to bully in the situation, not expecting, because they were more grown up, they would never walk away from millions and millions. But everything had come to me so easily and so quickly that I just had a very different attitude. And my business partner and I just went, we don't want to work with these guys long term. If this is how they are in the negotiation, then this is going to be horrible. Let's turn it off. And they were shocked. And then they tried to sue us.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they were it was really weird. It was very weird. But anyway, we untangled ourselves from that. And then I was offered the opportunity to go launch an office in London of that business and take it to London. And it was just kind of like, you know what, this will be really fun. There's 3 times as many people in the UK, and we're going to just, travel, and we'll go to Europe, and we'll go snowboarding, and we'll go to Ibiza, and we'll, do all that stuff. So we just kind of went, oh, that's it. We're going to move to London.
Okay.
so it was really random. We went from having tens of millions to basically shutting down the Australian business and moving to London.
Why did you shut it down? Why not keep it going, hire a manager, all that?
Because I was a 24-year-old.
Okay, fine.
It was just the next adventure. So
okay.
we'd ended the relationship with a major client who represented a huge chunk of revenue, and we could either restart in Australia with a new client or restart in London. It just felt like a great time to go restart in London.
Okay. So question on this front. So at this point, you're 24, you've presumably got a net worth that's in the 6 or 7 figures, probably 7, and you could just choose to put your feet up and not work and stuff, probably live the good life in Bali or whatever that looks like. What gave you that drive for a kind of more ambition, more stuff?
It was hugely fun. You've got to remember, we were working and partying and traveling, and like the business was not digging ditches. We were running events, going to restaurants, going to nightclubs, driving fancy cars. All of my mentors were way ahead of me. I was hanging around with people who had businesses doing 50 million, 100 million. I was regularly hanging out with people who had built billion-dollar businesses and things like that, because we would hire speakers and we would have people like dragons and sharks and best-selling authors and people who'd written, amazing books and all this. So I was hanging around a peer group of people who normalized that level of life. And I was being invited as this young entrepreneur into these really great, amazing circles. And, I got paid to go to Bali and speak at a conference, and I got paid to hang out backstage with all the people. So why would I give that up?
Okay.
And it was also, everyone on the team was under 30, and we were all single, and we were all like nightclubby kind of people. So we would all, like, a typical week, we'd finish up the week and then we'd all go clubbing as a team.
Nice. Cool. Yeah. So you moved to London and you were like 25 at this point, like 24, 25?
Yeah, about 25. Yeah.
Okay. So what
Well, we launched a similar business in London, working with international speakers to launch them in the UK market. Took off crazy, £4 million in the first year.
And just doing the event stuff.
Event stuff and all this sort of lead gen stuff. Basically doing launches for businesses that were successful outside of the UK.
Yeah.
So we had a Singaporean company and we had a US company, and we were launching them in the UK. 4 million in year one, and at the end of year one, we hired the London Palladium Theatre, 2,000 seats, and we did 600 grand worth of sales in the following week. It was just wild, right? So it was good times. And then the GFC came along, global financial crisis, and the whole thing came crashing down. So we went from making millions down to 400,000 in 2009. So it was just a complete, the recession just put a stop to everything. Our Singaporean client almost collapsed in Asia and had to stop coming to the UK, right? Because that was their growth plan. So that client was gone. And then our US client, the pound against the dollar went from 2 to 1 to it jumped by 40% in a day. And it was just unaffordable to do the deal. Yeah. So it just wasn't, the exchange rate didn't work. And we weren't able to successfully renegotiate. So I went from living in a penthouse apartment near Chelsea to moving into my sister's spare room in Acton, and just entering a really weird dark time of oh my goodness, everything's just literally come crashing down.
How was that transition?
Oh, it was great. Yeah, fantastic. I recommend it to everyone. It was dark and horrible. It was so dark and horrible. I remember in the middle of winter slipping on ice and almost breaking my arm. And I remember a really bad phone call and hanging up and being on a reflex of just anger, putting my fist out like that and banging it into a concrete wall, and almost breaking my hand. And I almost had a almost broken hand and almost broken arm. And I'm like, what is going on? And yeah, it was a horrible time. And it was a time of reflection, and it was time of thinking through, what do I want to do next? And the other weird thing that happened at that time is I decided to try and sell the business. And I had this guy who agreed to buy the business for 300 grand, two payments of 150 grand. And I was like, at least I'll start again with something new, but I'll have 300 grand. And anyway, on the day of exchange, he just doesn't show up. And turns out he'd had a heart attack and went into hospital. And randomly, my acquirer had a heart attack. Yeah, so weird, crazy weird time.
How long did that period last?
So in 2009, I wrote the book Key Person of Influence, which was all about my experience working with celebrities and authors and how they were building personal brands. During my reflection period, I reflected on what am I really excited about? Social media, this new emerging technology called Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and all this sort of stuff, and how we've built these technological engines to build personal brands, and how that will give rise to new types of businesses and all this sort of stuff. So 2010, I launched something called the Key Person of Influence Accelerator. It's a huge success. We launch in London. It sells out 3 times in a row. We launch in Melbourne. We launch in Sydney. We launch in Singapore. We launch in Tampa, Florida. We launch in Canada. So suddenly I'm building a global business again, and we're back to 8 cities, $1 million per city, so we're just smashing it. So it was another, that was over the following couple of years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So the key person of influence, the 5-step method to become one of the most highly valued and highly paid people in your industry. I would love to come to this in a moment. But I guess you wrote Entrepreneur Revolution a few years later, and this is sort of the more getting started with entrepreneurship beat type book.
So when I was writing Key Person of Influence, there was about 8,000 words at the beginning, setting the scene for the strange times that we're in, and that the world is changing in a massive way. And it just seemed like the book took forever to kick off and get going. So I cut that 8,000 words off and I parked it. And then I released KPI, and it became a good bestseller. And then the publisher said, well, what do you want to do next? Do you want to do another book? And I said, I've got these 8,000 words that I cut out. And I sent that across, and they went, oh, that's a book. That's a great book. It's all about how to start up as an entrepreneur before you're a key person of influence.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay. So I released Entrepreneur Revolution.
So what is the Entrepreneur Revolution?
So this is the idea, and a lot of your listeners won't get the significance of this, but I was born in 1981, and I was born in the industrial age of very much career and workforce and all this. There was no such thing as being a creator, and there was no creator economy, and there was no just become a YouTuber. Of course, none of that existed. And then there's this whole other world that we live in now where people can live and work from anywhere. You can set up a business. You can have $1,000 startup costs and, start a business that's global. You could literally use your phone and build a business that impacts thousands of lives. And it's like, wow, what a time to be alive. What an incredible moment in time that for the first time ever. So I likened this as an analogy to what it must have been like going from the agricultural age, where everyone had to have a farm and you had to have a family farm and you had to plow a field by hand or with a donkey, and then suddenly tractors, and then suddenly factories, and then now there's this entire different economy that exists with its own set of rules, completely different rules. And I use this analogy of what must it have been like to look across to the neighboring factory and see a 22-year-old on a tractor doing the work of 100 people. And now we look at there's a 22-year-old with a TikTok account making $3 million or whatever. And it's like, whoa, but how's that happening? Well, they're playing a different game. And there's this digital age, there's this entrepreneur revolution. So the book outlines the times that we're in, and then it says, okay, given that the world has changed and that there's a new set of rules, but most of us were raised in a schooling system that was built for industrial age. What are the new rules? How do we leverage the new rules? How do we start something that is in alignment with the new rules, right? And how do we then build a successful business and launch a successful business with a different mindset?
Yeah, that's. I was just thinking that the industrial revolution-y type mindset, I think, is still very prevalent amongst probably most people that I know. Like anyone who's not an entrepreneur or a creator.
Yeah.
Like half of my friends are medics, and so that's still very much you have a job, you go to work. There's no innovation.
It's a system that shouldn't change radically, right? Or it should change slowly.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're dealing with people's health outcomes. So it's going to change really slowly. Yeah. And the school system is a really slow changing system as well. So ultimately, we have a health system and we have a school system that is very much entrenched in the industrial age.
Yeah. And I think also and so often it's like when I was first doing the YouTube stuff, and even with my first business when I was at university, which was I was making $40K a year, $50K a year or something, which was the equivalent of a doctor's salary when I was in med school. My mind was just blown as to how sort of easy it was to make that money compared to toiling away on a ward for 60 hours a week.
Yeah.
And then when I actually started working and I was toiling away on a ward for 60 hours a week, and all of a sudden, one 30-second YouTube integration where I just spoke to the camera about a freaking app was making the equivalent of 1 month's salary. It just completely changed my entire world. It just
totally. It's like you're on the tractor plowing the field in a day.
Yeah.
Or you're one of 100 people with a hand plow going, this is ridiculous. And it's this weird thing of well, why would I not do that? It's hard not to.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's some things that you'll notice in the industrial age. So for example, we teach kids that you should not be disruptive, right? The worst thing you can get on your report card is, Ali is a disruptive person in the classroom. The best thing they can possibly call you on the front cover of Inc. magazine is disruptive, right? So, there's a disconnect between these things. In school, putting together a team of smart kids who give you the answers is called cheating.
Yeah.
In life, that's called having an executive team that is a really high functioning executive team. So for me personally, if I have a great CFO who does all my maths homework for me, that's smart. That's a good thing to have. But in school, that would be the worst thing to do. We're now this, and I mentioned it before, component labor is the name of the game in the schooling system. Your job is to become a useful component of labor to someone's big machine. And we're not taught anything about sales, marketing, money management, coming up with ideas, ideation, minimum viable product testing, market surveys. Yeah. None of that stuff is in school.
Yeah, I think the school thing as well also encourages the sort of perfectionistic attitude of I'm going to do the work and then I'm going to hand it in and I'm going to get a grade for the thing, and my self-worth is wedded to the grade. And so, like, again, if I just think of the example of a bunch of my friends who did really, really well in school and they are doing well in their corporate jobs or something, to put out a single blog post or write a single thing on LinkedIn to them feels like, oh my God, it has to be perfect. And it's just this attitude of like, I can't put something out.
Someone has to approve it.
Yeah, someone has to approve it. Yeah. And even almost a kind of maybe an unhealthy obsession with qualifications.
Yeah.
I randomly met a doctor at the train station who recognized me, like last week sometime, and she had been in medicine for 14 years and was come across my stuff. I think she actually read some of your books as well, and was sort of transitioning out to become a coach. Mm-hmm. She was doing a coaching qualification. Yeah. And then we grabbed breakfast, and she was like, I was like, okay, so how's the coaching business going? And she was like, oh, I'm doing it for free for a few friends. And I was like, okay, well, what's stopping you from charging? And she was like, oh, well, I haven't finished my qualification yet. Like, oh, it's going to happen in like 4 months. I was like, okay. And then when that happens, what are you going to do next? And she was like, oh, then I'll start posting on Facebook. And I was like, well, when are you going to charge people for the coaching? She was like, oh, maybe in a year or two.
Yeah, when I get a letter from someone to say, yeah, now it's time to charge. I have a doctor friend who told me, oh, I'm thinking of starting a business. And then next time I saw him, he'd enrolled in an MBA for the certification. But I mean, imagine if in school they said it's actually the first person to hand in their assignment and it only has to be directionally correct. like then it would be a very different environment. It's like, we're going to mark you based on speed to market. Like, here's the assignment, clock starts now. Whoever can hand in something that meets minimum standards and is directionally correct, you're the one who does it. And extra points if you can pull together 3 or 4 people who all work together, and you can get something there.
Yeah, I think on this point as well, like I've had similar conversations with friends, and there seems to be a lot of resistance in the sense of, oh, but are you saying that a neurosurgeon doesn't need to be qualified? It's like, well, no.
Definitely.
That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, definitely. If you're component labor, you have to be certified. You have to, because you're a component. You're a cog in the machine, and that cog has to be perfectly fit for the machine. So, you absolutely have to be. There are certain professions, especially like medicine, that you've got to be qualified and perfectly machined within an inch.
But I guess the danger is that sort of having that way of thinking, which then bleeds into anything else, and you think that suddenly someone has to give you permission to do a thing.
As soon as you're in the entrepreneur revolution, you're adopting a very different mindset. It's a mindset of not knowing rather than knowing. So the most curious person wins, not the most qualified person. So if you said, oh, I'm going through a period of great curiosity, I know nothing, and I'm trying to explore what people are frustrated by, that's probably the smarter position to take as an entrepreneur. Some of the best entrepreneurs, they love saying things like, talk to me like I'm a 3-year-old. I just don't understand. Sometimes they deeply understand, but they'll ask dumb questions because they're trying to stay curious. Steve Jobs' advice in his commencement speech was stay humble, stay curious.
Yeah, that just sparks a thought. So again, when I was at university and kind of building this business and stuff, it was weird how often I'd be the one to put my hand up in a lecture and ask a question about something that was like apparently obvious, but like I just had this sort of complete non-fear of looking like an idiot. And a bunch of friends spoke to me afterwards, and even to this day, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, I was chatting to some friends, and they were like, yeah, I remember you would always ask these like dumb questions in lectures. And I'd be thinking the same thing, but I would be thinking, I don't want to ask the question because I don't want to look dumb. I was like, well, it was, I think, having done the entrepreneur thing and trying to make my web design business when I was 14 years old, all like sort of entrenched in me this idea that like, it's totally reasonable to ask a dumb question.
Yeah. If you're a component, if you're a cog in the machine, you don't want to reveal that there might be a crack in the cog, right? Because then they might replace you. So it's better to be quiet and pretend that you're a perfectly formed cog, as opposed to, but if you're building the machine and you're looking for how could this machine run better, how could this be optimized to produce better outcomes, then you're totally looking for, you're basically going back to first principles. You're like, well, what problem are we trying to solve? What are we solving for? How do we do that faster? What's the fastest point between point A and point B? Talk to me like I'm an idiot, right? So those sorts of things become very useful. And that's the big mindset shift. So in the book Entrepreneur Revolution, it's all about changing the mindset. It's about getting out of the traditional mindset. I talk about 3 mindsets: reptile, which is fight, flight, freeze, anger, aggression, upset, emotional response. There's autopilot, which is learn, repeat, repeat the past, put more inputs in, remember those inputs, then deliver the correct outputs. And then there's visionary, strategic thinking, inspiration, love, connection, empathy, curiosity, all of those sorts of things. So it's about being in that visionary mind more than the autopilot or the reptile.
Nice. Okay, so let's say someone is listening to this or watching this and they've got a normal job. Let's say, I don't know, they work in consulting or something like that. And they're like, cool, I love the idea of being an entrepreneur. I joined my consulting job because, quote, it would teach skills that I could then use to start a startup someday. But they've ended up there for way too long because the promotion cycle is, or the bonus cycle is always, it's only 4 months away. What would be the sort of next steps that someone would take to kind of develop this mindset / become an entrepreneur?
Well, you can develop the mindset by having a go at producing something of value. There's a few sets of steps that you want to go through. So one step is ideation. Ideation is coming up with at least 10 ideas and then figuring out which one would be the best, or which 2 or 3 ideas would be the best. So that's an actual process called ideation. And most people jump from first idea to action rather than coming up with 9 other ideas and saying, well, why did I choose that one? And when I worked with one of our guys who was a billionaire, I said, how do you create a $1 billion company? He's like, oh, it's easy. You come up with 10 ideas that could be $1 billion companies and then start narrowing it down. And then, so it's like, oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
so he said, well, it's either going to be a telecommunications company, or it's going to be a tech company, or it's going to be a bank, or it's, so he's like, there's only a few
Actually,
things.
He does narrow it down.
Yeah, he's like, there's only a few things a $1 billion company could be. So you've got to then figure out which one would it be. Like, what would be your take on it? What would be your spin? So we went through and he was the first one to show me just this first step of ideation. So you want to go through ideation and come up with a bit of a criteria. As I said, by the way, joining an entrepreneurial team is better than trying to start one yourself. So I'm a big fan of, let's say, I'm jumping around here, I apologize, but let's say you are a consultant for a large company. Go be a consultant for a 10-person company. Go be a consultant for a 5-person boutique and do that for a year or 2. And you're going to be the special person because you came from a big name brand and now you're working in a boutique. They're going to treat you like a king, right? Or a queen. So it's going to be great.
Okay, just on that note, I'd love to get your take on this. One issue that lots of people have is I am currently making X at my current company, big company, et cetera, et cetera. I would be taking a pay cut to do this other thing that sounds cool. And it's I think it's interesting because usually X is like higher than what you would actually need to live, and usually the new salary is also a very reasonable salary. But people, I think, feel like, oh, I don't want to take a drop in my pay.
Yeah, and I can understand that. Especially, look, you're in a unique position in the sense that you don't have kids. Once you've got kids, then as much as you might personally, like for me personally, right, I can personally happily live mattress on the floor. Ramen noodles, whatever, right? That wouldn't bother me at all. But now I have kids. Yeah. We have huge overheads, insane overheads every month, right? And I can't make decisions of like, oh yeah, we'll all just live on mattresses on the floor. I might find myself divorced or something like that. So the key thing, or it wouldn't be fair to take them into that decision. So the key thing is there are certain people who can't take a pay cut. You've got to figure it out. So you've got to figure out, okay, what is my after-tax earnings? And sometimes a pay cut is not as savage as you think about it. If it's after-tax, you also might be spending a lot of money on commuting, or you might be spending a lot of money on things to keep up that particular role, which may not come with a boutique role. You also might have a boutique plus your side hustle venture money as a bit of a crossfade. Or you might view it as making an investment. So let's say you're taking a 10 grand pay cut. you're actually, the framing of it is, I'm actually investing 10 grand into the creation of a startup. I'm willing to invest up to 30,000. So I'm willing to take this pay cut for 3 years as an investment into the equity that I own in my own business. So it's not a pay cut; it's an investment into the startup equity. So it's a bit of a mental gymnastics to justify activity, but but essentially that's what you are doing. You are making an investment into startup equity. So it is tricky. It is difficult. One of the things that I recommend is you could do a little bit of evening consulting or something like that. There have been times for me personally where I have taken on a client in LA, being in London, because I wanted to earn an extra amount of money, and being in London allows me to consult in LA at 8:30 p.m. till 10 p.m. Right, so I can do a consulting gig and do it in my evening and their morning. So there are things that we live in this incredible range of options right now.
Yeah. Just on that note, so we were kind of talking about steps to take, and we said maybe joining an entrepreneurial company might be a good sort of springboard. One thing that a lot of people talk about who've had like success in business is how in the early days it was quite a long slog, quite a grindy, or even though it was fun, like work-life balance wasn't quite there. And usually when people get older, by the time I speak to them on the podcast, they're a bit more like work-life balancey and chill and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm always intrigued, to what extent is it reasonable to want to have work-life balance while you're starting something versus once it's already successful and now you can chill? So
it's quite a luxury belief, the idea of having work-life balance. It's something it's something that you can afford to have if you've made. So once you hit a certain level of wealth and success, you can afford to pontificate about work-life balance. Yeah. And if you're a single person who doesn't have any dependents, you can afford to think about work-life balance. The numbers, the statistics are very, very clear that the vast majority of people who earn a lot of money, who make a breakthrough in business, have a period of being well out of balance. I mean, there is not anyone who's winning an Olympic medal who's not crazy focused on that goal. There's not anyone who is developing a high-rise building that isn't, focused on that goal. So especially when you're creating a breakthrough, and especially if it's an outstanding result, the data doesn't lie about this. It's for something like 65% of all people earning over 100 grand do 55 hours a week or more. So, and when you look at almost all entrepreneurs, here's the reality of business. When you're starting a business, you're in the process of creating an asset, sweating that asset, and keeping track of what's going on. You're doing strategy, operations, sales and marketing, finance, HR. You're hiring people, onboarding people. So let's be real about it. If you were super optimized and gave each of those 4 things 15 hours a week, there's 60 hours. And that's if you're doing part-time on each of those. Like 15 hours a week is part-time sales. 15 hours a week is part-time creating an asset. So when you get to work-life balance is when you have a team. If you have 8 people working on a team and you take a holiday, 7 out of 8 are still working on the business. So it works. If you've got 8 people on a team and, you come up with an idea, you've got a group of people who can refine that idea, implement that idea, work on that idea, and produce something. And you've probably got someone who's full-time sales, and you've probably got someone who's full-time marketing. So now you've got a bit of team dynamic, team play. One of the great things to come out of the industrial age was something called division of labor, which is that if people just focus on one job and don't jump around, they make a lot more stuff. And that's true for any entrepreneurial business. A salesperson who's just focused on sales gets good at sales, and someone who's focused on editing videos gets good at editing videos. So if you try and get the video editor to make sales, they're going to suck at both. So work-life balance does tend to come later. I know that's unpopular to say. Everyone wants to be like, oh no, peace, love, dove, Hare Krishnas. We can all just, have a multi-million-pound business in our spare time. But everyone I know who's gone through that, even the people who talk about work-life balance, the way they came to work-life balance as a concept was by getting themselves completely burnt out. And then I'm reformed. Okay, great, you're reformed. Nice of you. Now you're a millionaire to be so reformed, right? Now you've got 55 people on your team working behind the scenes. Yeah, fabulous. Now you can just do a strategic role. Well done. That's the end state. But what they're not being honest about is how they got there. And they got there normally by being out of balance. They said no to a lot of stuff. They didn't go to the parties. They, like for example, when I did the 10 million year, all of those 5 years working for John, and then that was 60 hours a week, every week. We worked weekends. We ran events on the weekend. We might have had one weekend off in a month. When I was starting my first business, it was roll out of bed, have breakfast, and as soon as I finished breakfast, it's start work. And then it's work until dinner time, and then finish dinner, and then maybe do some more stuff after dinner, and then go to bed. And that was every day. And now we were doing fun stuff as well, taking clients out to restaurants, going out partying and all of that sort of stuff. There's no way I could have built those businesses without putting in serious time.
Yeah.
Building an asset, making sales, the whole lot.
The whole thing. In your experience, like having spoken to a bunch of people who are successful in business, do many of them regret the way that they spent their youth in hustle mode? Or is it a lot of it was like, oh, I'm glad I'm chilled out now, but I kind of had to get through that phase and I don't regret putting in all that work back when I was young?
Well, for starters, let's go to the data as well. Most people who start a business are 42. Most successful entrepreneurs are 42 when they start.
Oh.
Okay. The most well-worn path is that you work for someone in your 20s and you do an apprenticeship. In your 30s, you start to get your stride and you start to make some inroads and you start to demonstrate value. You work up the chain a little bit. Towards your late 30s, early 40s, you start to figure out how this whole industry works and you've got contacts, connections, you're trusted. And then at 42, you start a business that you then sell at 57, 15 years later and make your millions. So that's the data, that's the path, right? So the path that most people take is career, and this is most successful millionaire entrepreneurs, started at 42, sold the business at 57. So regretting there are very few who actually super successful entrepreneurs who started in their 20s. I've not met many people who do regret that. I think a lot of people went, oh my goodness, thank goodness I jumped in with both feet when I didn't have the commitments, because life gets more complicated, not less complicated. We end up with houses and families and, teams and, all the stuff. We end up with sick parents. We end up with diseases or ailments. All of that stuff. That's life, right? The least complex is age 20.
Yeah. So there's a friend of mine she's currently working full time as a doctor and wants to do a sort of creator thing on the side, and has kind of dabbled with it a little bit and has recognized that, hey, doing the side hustle on top of the full-time job is incompatible with also having a social life and also doing hobbies and also self-care and also going to the gym every day and also doing having good having 8 hours of sleep a night. And I'm just like, yeah, it is. And you kind of have to choose if you want it and whether it's worth the payoff. And how would you think about that?
It's a huge risk. There are very few broke, struggling doctors. Right? Yeah. Doctors cluster around a high point in society, around probably the top 10% of earners. Yeah. And it's very unlikely that you would meet someone who describes himself as a doctor who's just trying to get a break and trying to make it. And, Yeah,
no, they're usually pretty middle class, pretty chill.
But
chill is stronger.
There's hardly any that are crazy billionaires, and there's hardly any that actually drop below 35,000 a year or something like that. So you've got a very safe path. A safe path would mean that data clusters around a particular outcome and all the data sits around that outcome, right? So that is the doctor's path. The doctor's path is very safely, you're going to end up in this good, comfortable lifestyle. That's not true for entrepreneurship. There are billionaires and there are loads of people who are completely broke and struggling. There are people who plowed their life savings in. And they're, it was the worst decision they ever made. They just weren't cut out for it, or they made radical decisions. So she's right to not take that lightly. That's an important decision to make. You need to really get good signals from the market that the market wants this thing that you have. So once again, wanting to have a side hustle, wanting to have this is all about your own personal needs, which are irrelevant to the market. The market does not care, right? Like if I go and buy a kebab at 3 o'clock in the morning, do I ever ask the kebab shop owner, are you okay? Are you managing your work-life balance enough? Why are you out here at 3 o'clock in the morning? Is your family seeing enough of you? I'm not asking anything like that. I'm just paying my £4 for my kebab at 3 o'clock in the morning. I have no care. The market does not care about your work-life balance, doesn't care about how healthy or happy you are. It just cares whether you're meeting its needs. So the starting point for any business, first principles, is not what do you want? It's like, does the market want something? And are you willing and able to make that work for the marketplace? But you can't be too self-centered here. Entrepreneurship is an act of service. It is a gift to the world. You're creating something that's going to solve problems for others in a scalable way. You're going to create jobs for others. As you get bigger and bigger, all the hard problems are going to roll up to your entrepreneurial desk. All the easy stuff will be solved by the people that you hire, and only the tricky stuff gets to you. So you got to work out, have I got a sufficient number of signals from market that the market says, I need you to do this. You didn't quit your medical career until you were getting people signing up and subscribing, and there were good, solid signals where your brain very logically and mathematically worked out, no, I can do this. I'm getting a signal from market. But there are many people who might go, he just jumped out. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, it was 3 years of like market making and then of getting the signals to be like, okay, now it's time.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So I'd encourage people now you don't have to take 3 years to get the signals. You could do 30 to 150 surveys and people say 100%, I really want this thing. I want that CrossFit gym in Putney to exist.
Yeah.
And, we need you to set that up. Great. And then I would also encourage, once again, go do a year or two with an existing business, a boutique, go work for an entrepreneur, see if you actually like the lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. It's just like a fairly reasonable path of like, hey, this is like the entrepreneur game is a different kind of game. It's got different kind of rules, so understand what the rules are. Recognize that your outcomes may vary massively compared to the safe career that you're in, where outcomes cluster about a specific area. And now, given that we know that there is a quote risky bet to make here, let's try and figure out a way to de-risk the bet. And signals from the market are one way of doing that. And I guess even when someone has a full-time job, especially when someone has a full-time job, the ideation stage that we've talked about, coming up with 10, 50, 100 ideas for what could work and narrowing them down and then figuring out ways to test those without spending money.
That is the next step called MVP, minimum viable product. So minimum viable product is one of the best things you can do is set up either a scorecard or an event and see if you can fill an event or get a scorecard. So let's say you want to set up a health-related business because you're a doctor and you want to zero in on a particular health-related set of products. Can you get 30 or 40 people to turn up to an event on that topic? You might discover it's a lot of work just to get 30 people to show up to an event. You might discover you push the door and it flings right open. You book a venue for 30 and 70 show up and it's like, oh, okay, that's a pretty cool signal. A scorecard is where you essentially set up an online survey or question where people can benchmark themselves. And that is an amazing MVP, minimum viable product. So you're essentially collecting data, you're collecting signals of interest, and you're getting people to reveal themselves as being interested in that topic. So you might say, oh, what I want to do is I want to be a marathon running coach. I'm going to help people run marathons, right? And you say, okay, great. I'm going to launch the Are You Ready to Run a Marathon scorecard? And we're going to see if I can get people to take that for free. If I can't get people to take that for free, there's no way I'm going to get them to pay because everything's downstream from lead generation. So if I can't generate the leads, forget about the business. And it's like, okay, what's my next idea? Oh, my next idea is diet coach. I'm going to help people to eat better. Okay. Are you ready to improve your diet? Take the scorecard. Is your diet optimized? Take the scorecard. Okay, nice. Great. I'll answer the quiz. I got 150 people who answered this and look, all of them struggle with this thing.
And I guess you can just start by making one of these things on like some free software and chucking it on your Facebook friends list or messaging your friends on Instagram who you know.
Someone created that software.
yeah. So what is a scorecard? What's the deal with that?
So when I launched the Key Person of Influence Accelerator, we created the Key Person of Influence scorecard, and this became a massive thing. 90,000 people took it, and we made £15 million off the back end of sales.
And it's just like a glorified online quiz.
It's a glorified online quiz, right? It's like a personality test. It essentially, in the book, it says, are you any good at pitching? Are you any good at creating products? And it asks you, the scorecard asks you a series of questions and it gives you a score.
Yeah.
And it says you're a 4 out of 10 for pitching.
There's something so addictive about that.
Something.
I signed up with a CEO coach like 3 days ago. He had 2 scorecards that he made me take, and I was like, damn, I've got a lot of improvement.
Yeah, right. Because it's like if I ask you 50 questions and each question gives you a little bit of psychological, tension, and you're like, and then it adds up, and then your score comes out at 43%.
Yeah.
And you being you're like, I've got to optimize right up.
There's so much to improve. This is great.
Exactly. Yeah. So that quantification on a scale of 1 to 10, how painful is it? Oh, it's a 4 out of 10, right? So all of this works psychologically. It all comes together in a scorecard. So basically, we launched a scorecard, Key Person of Influence. It was a huge success. Lots of millions and millions worth of sales came off the back of it. And my clients started saying, hey, that assessment thing that I took, how do I get one of those for my business? So at the time I had an IT business and we were building them for clients about $8,000 each. And we were basically, my now co-founder, Steve, he was building them. I was selling them and we sold like 10 and everyone who bought one had a massive result. So we had this guy who was running a DJ school. He had this big social media following and then he launched the DJ scorecard. Are you ready to become a professional DJ? We're going to measure you on 5 areas. And suddenly thousands of people are taking the scorecard and he's got all this data and he's like, whoa, and his business grew big off the back. So it went from having a social media following to having proprietary data and leads. So we saw this working. We thought, okay, let's make it super easy and not $8,000. We created Score App. Now people can just basically build their own scorecards. It gives you a template with a landing page and a questionnaire and a results page and a PDF. And then you create your own scorecards. So like, for example, you could do a productivity scorecard.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I was like, why don't I have a productivity scorecard?
Yeah.
That would be so good.
Yeah.
I'd basically take all my knowledge of productivity and be like, do you currently have sort of life values? Do you currently do a weekly review? Do you currently set a daily highlight every morning? And the answer to a lot of those things if the answer to all those things is yes, it's like, I have nothing to teach you. But like for 99.9% of people, there will be holes in that thing. And I can be like, all right, cool. Here are the resources.
And you don't have to waste time on the things that you're good at. You can just go straight to, okay, all of your productivity issues relates to scheduling.
Yeah.
So let's get you all the scheduling tools. So that's your own proprietary data. At the moment, it's unlikely, but at the moment, social media could just switch you off. They have done that with people. I can't imagine you getting switched off with your radical beliefs on productivity.
Yeah.
But the good thing about this is you would own your own database.
Yeah.
You'd have your own data.
Damn. Because we do so much work anyway, creating courses and stuff, and we whip together a landing page and sometimes do a little bit of pre-collecting things. And then I read over subscribe, I'm like, we should probably do a little bit more. We probably shouldn't just be like, all right, here's the thing, guys, take it or leave it. But like, there's more to do. And a scorecard just feels like it's just like we just take our core syllabus and turn it into questions. And now people identify that, okay, my camera confidence is at 15%. I have so much to go. This course will take me up to 95.
Yeah. And then they take the scorecard at the end and they go, it did take me to 95.
Yeah. And if it doesn't, we can give them their money back.
Yeah.
As like a guarantee tied to the thing.
Exactly. And it quantifies it and it makes it ROI is clear. The other thing too is you might have lots of ideas and you might say, creating a whole course is going to take 3 weeks.
Bollock.
Right?
It takes ages.
Yeah, it does.
Way more than 3 weeks for a lot of people. Yeah.
So let's say you say, okay, well, I've got 3 ideas and I'm not sure which one.
Yeah.
I'll just take 3 scorecards. I'll create 3 scorecards.
Yes. I have an idea for a course of like, essentially called something like the life-changing magic of a personal assistant. Yeah. And the team has always been a bit like, I don't know if anyone...
Should you hire a personal assistant, take the scorecard?
Yeah.
So then
this is so good.
If 4,000 people take the scorecard,
it's like we should clearly make a course on this.
Yes,
and then we've got their email addresses. We can interview them. We can be like, hey, what are your problems? Like, let's make sure this course.
Well,
you'll
know
good.
what the question. You'll know what their problems are because they'll have answered the questions.
This is genius. Okay, cool. Anyway, I'm gonna take lots of notes off this. But you've just released this book,
Scorecard Marketing.
Like I bought it on Kindle like on Friday or something. I was like,
super tactical. Yeah. You can see it's really short compared to the other the other books. It's half the size. Yeah. It's designed to be tactical, and it's just about creating that MVP and that lead generation asset.
By the way, just a quick thing to mention, we actually have a link to ScoreApp with a discount code in the video description and in the kind of show notes if you want to check out this kind of lead gen method that Dan's talking about in this episode.
Okay, so I have an idea for a business and I want to test it by creating some sort of questionnaire type thing that I can send to people that I know through Facebook or through being part of the Runners World Forum or part of menshealth.com or whatever. Chuck it on the forum or chuck it to my Facebook friends. Would you be interested in this sort of thing? Free scorecard, free questionnaire. They put their email address in at the end?
Yeah, ideal. Yeah, or at the beginning or at the end. Same thing if you run an event. So as I said, my whole first empire was introduction events. And that was the lead generation and warm-up phase in one. And then scorecards became the digital version of that, always available 24/7, collecting data, making recommendations on autopilot. So those are all lead generations, but they're also good MVPs. So anyone who's got an idea, run an event, see if you can fill it, launch a scorecard, see if you can get people taking it, and that'll tell you whether you're going to be any good or not, or whether you've got any chance to do this. Do it for maybe 4 months in a row and see whether you can grow it each month. Because if you get 30, then 20, then 10, then 5, then we're tracking in the wrong direction. If you get 30, then 50, then 100, then 150, okay, maybe this could take off. So you want a very simple MVP. It's just lead generation at first. So all you're trying to do is, can I generate leads? Because everything is downstream from lead generation. So can I generate leads? If you can't generate leads, forget about how good you are as a doctor. Forget about how amazing your product is. Forget about how well you can do it speaking. Right, all of that doesn't matter if you can't get the lead. So ultimately, the first thing to test is lead generation. Can I generate leads for this idea?
So what counts as a lead?
Any signal of interest, where essentially they're giving you some revealing signal of interest. So buying a ticket is a reveal. It's basically, if I buy a ticket to the magical life-changing power of a personal assistant, and it's a 1-hour Zoom webinar workshop, clearly, I'm the type of person who's considering a personal assistant. So it's a signal of interest. Name and email, and I'm giving you an hour of time to tell me about this. Or if I fill in the scorecard, that's a strong signal of interest. So a lead is just somebody revealing themselves to say, I'm interested. It's that whole, hey, I'm interested in that.
Okay.
That's a lead.
So what happens next once you've got the lead? I've got the email address.
So that's called your minimum viable product. So the next thing is called product market fit. Product market fit is adjusting the product to meet the market. Okay. So you imagined the product would be red, but everyone wants it in blue. And you're like, okay, as much as I thought it should be red, it needs to be blue. So this is where you do product market fit work. So you want to be the marathon coach, and you imagined that you would be tweaking everyone's running style, but they all want help with diet. They all want help picking a pair of shoes. And it's like, just go down and get a pair of shoes and just watch this video on diet. It's like, yeah, but that's what we want. And it's like, oh, okay. So I need to include that in the product. So this is called product market fit. And it's essentially making adjustments to your product so that the product fits what the market wants.
So I think I accidentally did this. Well, it wasn't quite accidentally. When launching the first iteration of our YouTuber course 2 years ago, we worked with this marketing coach, and he was like, okay, send an email to your list being like, what is your biggest challenge with growing your YouTube channel? And see what happens. And then on the second page of that, asking them a few sort of more qualifying, a few more questions. And initially I was imagining our YouTuber course would be helping people from 100,000 subscribers scale up by building systems and processes and stuff. Turns out 95% of the people who filled out the survey hadn't even made their first video. And the other 5% were all under 100 subscribers. And we were like, what the hell? This is not what we had in mind. This is more like a YouTube for complete and utter beginners who have a job but don't feel like they have the time to do YouTube properly and want to just learn all the...
Yep.
Oh, that's a very different product to here is how you can hire and outsource a team and build systems and stuff to blow up your business.
No, it's your market. They're like, we want to get started, and they almost always would say, what equipment do you have? And you might have gone, oh, well,
it doesn't matter, just start with your phone. But like, people love the equipment thing.
They want the equipment thing,
and so people love templates. People love the whole like, oh, what's a template you use for your videos? It's like, I mean, it's not that hard. It's just these three things. But okay, let's
draw the three things and put it.
And now people love it. They're like, oh my god, thank you so much for the template. It's so useful. And I'm always a bit baffled, but now I've kind of learned over time.
But that's product market fit.
Yeah.
And product market fit is often baffling because your values are different to the values of someone who's buying the product. Because if you're a fitness trainer, you've got fitness high on your values and you research it all the time, you read it all the time. If you're a fitness trainer buyer, you're buying a product like that, fitness is low on your values, which is why you're buying.
Yeah.
So you basically have a mismatch in values. The things that are quite obvious to the person who's setting up a business are actually non-obvious to the people who are buying from the business. And the things that are highly valuable over here might be too advanced over here. So there's always going to be a mismatch, and you have to get into that alignment, and that's product market fit.
Yeah. And that's where I guess, our doctor turned coach thinks that people care about a qualification when in reality they probably don't. Like or maybe they do, but like there's some level of testing the market to see if that's actually a thing.
Yeah, well, maybe they want a certificate that you're now certified and ready to put your first YouTube video up, and maybe that's important. And you might sit there and go, "That's so silly," but it's like, "But I just want to be certified that I'm ready to start." And it's like, okay, well, here's the certificate, right? So that is all product market fit.
Nice. And the great thing about this is that this is all stuff people can do like in a couple of hours on a weekend while you have a job.
Totally.
Like, it's not that hard to put together one of these things. Go on Score App, go on any Google Forms or anything like that, and you can probably whack one together.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're collecting data, you're collecting signals of interest, you're getting leads. Remember, my background was like people ringing 1-800 numbers and people emailing that they would like to attend. So anything like that, like, any signal of interest is going to be a powerful signal of interest. And then product market fit is making adjustments. Now, the end result of product market fit should be a landing page or a brochure that when you show it to people, they go, oh, that's cool, right? So I know this sounds weird, but the end result for that stage is you now have a landing page or a brochure that is the document that shows this is the offer, this is the product. It's an offer form. And most people, it's like they kind of steamroll ahead, but they don't produce that piece of collateral. That piece of collateral is a very important step where people can hold it, see it, open it, look at it. You don't have to, by the way, you could create a brochure for going on a trip to the moon. And it doesn't necessarily have to exist, and you don't have to own rockets and all of that sort of stuff. But you could say, in 2025, I'm going to be partnering with a rocket company for a trip to the moon. Would you sign up for this? Would you, does this look like something you'd want? And all it needs to do is be a brochure that looks like a trip to the moon brochure. And, it says trip to the moon right there. And now there's no cost in doing that, right? A little bit of time and design, but ultimately you can show people and they can then go, yes, I want that.
Wow. Yes. And this is, I'm just thinking, like, this is the exact stuff we used to do in like ICT class in school of like, hey, pretend like you're designing this database and let's make a brochure on Microsoft Publisher or whatever it was back in the day around the thing. And I guess the equivalent in the modern world is either just like whipping up a quick landing page on like Squarespace or anything simple, even like a Google Doc. This coach person who I had breakfast with was like obsessing over her WordPress website. I was like, honestly, I have paid for $10,000 coaching packages off the back of a Google Doc. You don't need the thing where it's just like the offer laid out in bullet points.
Some document.
Yeah, something that I can be like, okay, here is the offer and here's how much it costs. Ooh, on that point, here's how much it costs. How does do you put the price on the?
So there's 3 documents that eventually come together. There's the brochure, the offer form, and the sign up. Right. So the brochure is all the kind of story around the product and what's included. The offer form is how much is it and what do you get specifically. Now, on a landing page, you would have seen if you hit the pricing button on most websites and it gives you one of those drop downs where it says gold, silver, bronze, and it's tick, 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 cross, cross,
that's
cross.
The sign up page. Yeah.
Right?
That's the offer page.
That's the offer.
Yeah.
And the sign up is where people buy and they put in all their details and they pay a deposit. They'll pay just a holding deposit for a startup. They'll just, or they'll say, you can say, we will notify you when this is available. One of the best things you can do at the MVP level is you can put up a landing page. If people click the buy now button, it says this product's no longer available in your area or not yet available in your area. Join the waiting list. And then people go, okay, I'll join the waiting list. That way you don't need payment gateways. You don't need to have credit card machines or any of those sorts of things. You're just collecting the signal that they were willing to pay, but you didn't let them.
Is it at all useful to... So we're having this dilemma with our courses where it's like, my instinct was that we should have the landing page before we even think about creating the course, because then we're like, and we should do the audience interviews and use that to tweak the landing page. And then we should have like a pre-order form that gives them like a big discount or something. And so that we, in addition to getting an idea of how many people click the button, we get an idea of how many people were willing to pre-order.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would generally recommend?
It's so much better. You don't need to do discounts either. Demand and supply tension push the price up, not down. So for example, if you said we're doing a cohort of 300 and join the waiting list, and if it's transparent that 3,500 people joined the waiting list and there's only 300 spots, you don't need a discount. So transparent demand and supply tension pushes prices up. So essentially, any join the waiting list or register your interest or any of that sort of stuff, provided there's a level of transparency to show the tension, that will result in high prices, not low prices.
Okay, so I feel like I've like through reading your stuff stumbled upon a lot of these ideas over the last several years. But when someone hears about it for the first time, the thought that you can sell a thing without having created the thing is going to leads to like, oh, is that unethical? That sounds evil. That sounds bad. Sounds like how
it's very evil.
What's going on? With
that? It's very simple. You're either asking them to attend an information event, which you're going to deliver an information event on Zoom, or maybe you're going to book a little room, right? Boardroom or something, but you're inviting people to an event and that is a standalone thing that they can get some information and learn more about the topic. Or you're inviting them to take a scorecard or a survey, and they're going to hand over some data in exchange for some feedback, right? So there's an ethical exchange. Or you're inviting them to join a waiting list where they know that the product is not yet available, but they're wanting to be included in information and updates that when they become available. So Elon Musk knew that Cybertruck was not going to be built for 3 years, but he launched Cybertruck. He showed people what Cybertruck would look like. He invited people to put down a $100 deposit if they wanted to be in the waiting list for a Cybertruck, knowing full well that it wouldn't be available for 3 years. He collected 1 million deposits, $1 million $100 deposits, and that allowed him to raise an unlimited amount of capital from the market to then go and fulfill those orders. So he was able to go and build the factories, and imagine he hadn't collected those signals. And you go to JP Morgan and you say, hey, look, we want to create a Cybertruck and this is what it looks like. It's unlike anything that's ever been built. And JP Morgan's going to go, we can't give you money for a factory for that. Yeah. But if you go in there and say 1 million people have put down a $100 deposit, it's like, great, what are the terms?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not doing anything unethical. It's an event, it's a scorecard, or it's a waiting list.
Where did the name scorecard come from?
Well, a quiz typically is testing your knowledge. Like if I quiz you on your Beatles trivia, I'm testing to know what you know. A assessment kind of feels like academic. I just wanted to keep it like a fun way of describing.
That sounds cool, yeah.
So it's like a scorecard. It's like, should you start a YouTube channel? Answer these questions, find out, take the test, get a scorecard. And the scorecard is like, because we've set up the software so that you can have multiple categories. So you could have diet, exercise, and sleep. And then it's like, oh, your diet's strong, your exercise is strong, but your sleep is the weakest. So it's that kind of a scorecard of, being able to look at different categories.
Yeah. Oh, man. Going to make a productivity scorecard. That'd be so fun. Yeah,
definitely. And what categories would you do?
Probably something like, do you know where you want to go?
So like vision or
type stuff. And then in terms of like, do you know where you want to go? Do you know how you're going to get there? So in terms of like goal setting.
So tactical planning.
That kind of stuff. Then it's going to be, how good is your takeoff? So like getting started with work, overcoming procrastination, all that kind of stuff. Then how good are you at staying on the course? So like not getting distracted and focused and stuff. And then
Probably gadgets and tools, right? Some like people love people love gadgets and tools.
Definitely. How strong are your how strong are your supplies? Something around like, to what extent do you regularly take breaks and recharge and blah 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 blah.
So you probably want to have 3 to 5 categories.
Yep.
You want to boil it down to 3 to 5 categories.
Yep.
And you want to then do 6 questions per category.
Okay.
All right. So it's 30 questions all up, something like that. And then basically when people answer the 30 questions, the scorecard will then break it into the categories, and it'll say you have no gadgets, you're a 0 for gadgets, but you're really high on motivation. You've got an amazing vision, but your tactical implementation's low. So then you say, great, you've got a clear vision, but we need to work on your tactics and your gadgetry.
And then that gives a clear indicator. Even if I don't make the specific product of like, oh, wow, loads of people really struggle with motivation. Cool, let's try and make a video, write a book, do a thing based on that market.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay, sick. So we've got the ideation thingy, we've narrowed it down, and then we have built the MVP, which is the scorecard or the event or the webinar. On that note, what's the deal with webinars? They have a sort of a bit of a, in my mind, webinar equals slightly scammy. I guess it's basically
COVID changed that.
Yeah.
It's just a cheap event that you can put on, like I just think of it as a Zoom meeting, and you're just going to present some slides. So if I was launching a new business, I'm going to put on a Zoom meeting because I want to reduce the amount of time that it takes for people to jump on or jump off if they don't like it. So I might say, hey, I'm a doctor. I want to do a lecture on what we've been learning around gut health. Let's say, so I'm going to do an introduction to weight loss through better gut health. Would you like to jump on? It's going to be a 45-minute lecture. Jump on Zoom. You don't have to travel anywhere. You don't have to catch a train. You don't have to do any of that. So it's a Zoom meeting. So yeah, look, any tool can be used for scammy stuff. A boardroom, there are probably boardrooms full of scammers right now, right? But it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with a boardroom.
Yeah.
So it's just a Zoom meeting. It's low cost for you, low friction for them, and it's just an easy way to test the market. Because if you can get 30 people on that webinar, but half of them drop off during the webinar, then it's like, okay, something's wrong. So it's giving you feedback, and that's all we're after at the beginning. So MVP, product market fit. The next one's called go-to-market.
Okay.
Go-to-market is where you're now pushing sales and marketing on. You might raise some money to go-to-market. It's very easy to raise go-to-market money because you've done your MVP, you've got your data, you've got your testing, and now the data says we should go all in on this. So now it's go-to-market. When people think about starting a business, they normally mentally jump to go-to-market. So it's like, oh, I need to go and talk to people and quit my job and all that sort of stuff. And they haven't done those first few steps. So go-to-market is where you turn on all your lead generation. You might spend money on ads. You might do joint ventures and promotions. You're hustling. You're making sales. You might hire a team at that point. You might hire a salesperson. So that's all the go-to-market activity. You're probably going from testing revenue. Maybe you've earned 50 grand testing, and now you're going to earn 500,000 or $1 million.
Oh, where did the testing revenue come in?
Well, you might have had people put down deposits, or you might have just taken on, like, let's say, well, for example, when we built ScoreApp, I did like a dozen people who paid 8 grand each for their scorecard, and we built it on WordPress, and we literally just charged them the full amount to build it from scratch each time. And that's because there was no platform. That's how much it cost. So we probably earned 80 to 100 grand worth of people paying for a setup, but it was a hands-on setup.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of startups do this, where you sign up to the thing, but in the early days, it's someone on a Google Sheet who's like doing the thing.
Yeah.
And they know they're going to build the software at some point, but at least they've got someone on a Google Sheet doing the thing.
That is the most successful startups. Yeah. That's how it's done. That's how the professionals do it, by the way. A lot of the time, the amateurs think that the professionals go and build this amazing, all singing, all dancing thing and then sell it. It's absolutely not. The more professional the entrepreneur, the more likely they are to be just like putting together slide decks and making the sale and then doing a hands-on one at a time sale to see how the customer's interacting at every single step. And, you might want to create a productivity app, and you literally have a Google Sheet, and you have a person who rings up and says, have you done your Google Sheet today? and let's go through it together. Jump on and we'll both do it. And it's like, oh, this isn't an app. It's a Google Sheet. It's like, that's a pro, that's a pro entrepreneur. Amateur entrepreneur will get the family's 300 grand, mortgage the house, like, grandma's money's in it. And then like they built this all singing, all dancing piece of technology that nobody's ever going to use.
Nice. Yeah, I think personal trainers who do like online personal training and stuff, I feel like there's this thing where it's like they're going to give you the programming or something like that, but it's probably just like a Google Sheet template that they just use for all their clients. And maybe at some point there's like a sophisticated level of like customization, but realistically everyone broadly needs the same plan. So like, it's not that hard.
Yeah. And a lot of the time people want hand holding, they want support, they want accountability. So what they're providing is those types of things. But once again, that is a self-employed freelancer type model. So it's not so much like what we're discussing is that world of the entrepreneur, building the scalable solution and building a business that will eventually have value. Because ultimately, an entrepreneur builds an asset. And the reason entrepreneurs can sell their business is they have an asset and the asset's saleable. And that's the difference. Self-employed people aren't really building an asset. They're selling labor. So this is a pathway to that exitable, saleable, scalable asset. People who have work-life balance are underpinned by assets. So the reason I might have work-life balance is because I've got best-selling books that are selling. Like it's weird. I sell a few books an hour, every hour around the clock. And that is like a relationship engine always running. And people are learning about what we do and who we are without me having to physically be anywhere. So that's called an asset. An asset has been developed and then that asset works. Online scorecards, we generated 90,000 leads on autopilot, and those were always coming in. We automatically connected those to a salesperson. So when a lead came in, a salesperson got a notification and then they pick up the phone, talk to that person, make a sale. So I can be anywhere in the world. That is underpinning yourself with assets. So what we're talking about with entrepreneurship is the creation of an asset that does the work. Intellectual property, media, or tech is normally the primary assets that we work with as entrepreneurs is intellectual property, media, and technology.
Right. So I'm thinking to my hypothetical productivity course, for example. The assets are the YouTube videos that
media.
Plug the scorecard.
Yeah, based on intellectual property. So the IP, the scorecard is technology, the videos are media, and your approach to it is intellectual property.
And then every day, X number of people will fill out the scorecard, probably because I'll just plug it. It's a free scorecard. It's easy to plug in a video without seeming like scammy in any way. It's like literally just a free scorecard. Of the people that are sufficiently then qualified through the scorecard, we could then either do a frictionless sale of like, you would love the online course. Or do where does a salesman fit into this equation?
Salesperson typically fits with any sale that is north of a couple of thousand.
Okay.
Because just by virtue of the fact that there's a spend normally requires some trust and some customization and conversation. So if you were doing a productivity rollout with a corporate and they were thinking about doing this with 70 of their employees, then that would normally involve some form of sales conversation. It's unlikely that the NHS would roll out a 70-person trial on productivity without talking to someone first. So essentially, when there's a commitment, normally for things that are less than 1,000 and that have a free trial, any of those types of things, you don't normally need a salesperson. You can do it through media, but once we go into the thousands, most people want to talk to someone, and that's where a salesperson fits in. And then when the leads come in, that salesperson can talk to them and identify, and reassure and give the right information, because if a salesperson's good, they live and breathe this product and service. They understand all the complexity and all the moving parts. And then the person's got their narrow set of needs, and the salesperson is essentially sharing with them, these are the features, advantages, benefits that are relevant for you.
So our YouTuber Academy course is now north of $2,000. So like $2,000, I think $3,000 and $7,000 is 3 different packages. And I've always sort of thought, especially after reading Oversubscribed, would it be useful to have a sales function?
Well, you'd probably find that you could add $1 million a year just through a salesperson. So if you've got warm leads, there are plenty of people who they've already signaled their intent that they want to do this. The only reason they're not buying is they're just not sure. I would hypothesize that the number one reason people don't buy is they don't feel confident themselves that they will be the right person to do the work. And if you focus your energy on having a salesperson who can listen to what their idea is, show them some case studies or examples of people who've had a similar idea, help them to identify that, yes, there's a market for what you're talking about, or no, there's not. And then just do a little bit of reassurance, and then maybe offer some sort of a guarantee period where you say, hey, look, it sounds like you need to test this idea. If you knew this would work, would it be a silly decision to spend $2,000 on this? No, I could do that. Okay, great. So what if we have a guarantee period where we do some testing, and if you can get more than 50 people to subscribe to your channel, that's enough of a test in month 1 to know it's a good idea, and then you're happy to spend the $2,000. Yeah, okay, great. So anything less than 50 people subscribed, we'll refund the money. If it goes over 50, if you've done the work, you've uploaded these videos, you've got your 50 subscribers, then you're happy. Right? So a little bit of that conversation, you probably find that you could make a sale a day, 200 days of the year. There's another 400,000, and up.
Not bad. That could be quite fun.
And it could be a good service, right? It's thinking. It's radical empathy for the person who's buying.
Yeah, it's like, is this genuinely useful for the? So like last time we did, like 2 cohorts ago, I was we sort of did like a Zoom webinar, hop on a Zoom call. I was available for an hour, like 4 times a day, just to answer people's questions about the thing. But what I found was that, like, I don't know, 20 people would show up, 15 of them would have the cameras off. Most of them were like younger people that were never going to sign up, but just wanted to see what I was like on a Zoom call, and it just ended up being not overly helpful. Is that where you then start qualifying leads and have one-on-one conversations and stuff?
Yeah, so you'd probably have a salesperson who does an email out and says, hey, I'd love to talk to you about your YouTube channel. Would you like to have a chat? Here's a link to my diary. People then book a time in the diary. Maybe it's a 20-minute, 30-minute slot. Tell me about what kind of YouTube channel you'd like to launch. Tell me, where are you at in your YouTubing journey? Right at the beginning, I've got 100,000 followers, right? Who knows? Or maybe the scorecard's already told you. So it's like, hey, a scorecard says that you've got 5,000 plus followers. Tell me a bit about how did you get there? So what are you looking to do next? What help do you think we can offer? What made you signal your interest in our product? What held you back? What stopped you from going ahead with it? Okay, so you were just going away on a holiday and the timing didn't work. What about now? Oh, no, you're fine now. Okay, great. I'm glad I called you. Let's get you set up. So, those things happened all the time. And sometimes people will be too scared to ask you a question because it's you. You're the figurehead. You're the key person of influence. So they might just be too nervous to ask a silly question. But they'll ask you a salesperson.
Yeah, and like the cool thing about this, I think, is that the ability to just offer someone a phone call is something that, again, anyone can do even when they have a job. Like I just the amount of people that I speak to who are like, I want to do the side hustle thing, but I have a job or I'm a full-time student and like I've only got a few hours on a weekend. And sort of there's this impression that people have that they have to do this mountain of work over a period of several years before they can get anywhere at all. But actually this process of come up with the ideas, MVP with a scorecard or with a Zoom event or whatever, get the product market fit, hop on a phone call with some people and just actually figure out what their problems are and be like, would you be willing to pay X amount for this thing?
Yep.
It feels very doable.
It's all doable. Yeah. The hard part is go to market and scale and exit. So the next 3 steps is what we think of as entrepreneurship, which is go to market, which is ramp, turn on the jets. Let's go for it. Let's hire a team. Let's salesperson. All of that sort of stuff is all go to market strategy. Scale is multiple locations. Now we're going to go out so we might start in London and then go out to Los Angeles and New York and different locations. So we're going to go. Scale is normally new products, new markets, new territories. So we're going to scale out, and then exit is let's sell this business and go again. So when we think of entrepreneurs, we think go to market, scale up, exit.
Yeah.
But actually, the first 3 steps are very doable, which is ideation, minimum viable product, and product market fit.
Amazing. All right. So we've talked a lot about these first few stages of the entrepreneur revolution, becoming an entrepreneur. I think we'll leave the entrepreneur subject there because most people, as we get down the list, like the amount of people that scale up and go to market and exit is relevant to like dwindles. But I'd love to hear like what's it like for you? You now run a company that has like 100 plus employees, and you own multiple businesses, and you're living with wife and kids in London. It seems like you're living the dream life. What's that like? And I'm asking from a selfish perspective, because I'm trying to figure out, what does my career look like 10, 15, 20 years later? And at the moment, I see examples of people like Tim Ferriss and Ryan Holiday who do the sort of content thing and writing a book occasionally. It seems good, but I haven't really spoken to many people that seem to be living their best life with wife and kids while owning multiple businesses and stuff. So well, what's it like?
Well, wife and kids is the best thing ever, right? Yeah. So, for me, that's the thing that really completes life and makes it all worthwhile and makes the journey, all the ups and downs, just pale in comparison to when you get the family and the family home and all of those sorts of things. What's interesting is that no matter what level of wealth you're at, when you have little kids, life becomes very different, very boring, right? Routine based. It can be a massive challenge to your identity and your ego. Suddenly the whole world is not you. Suddenly you don't matter at all. So you go from being the center of your ego universe to being a second, a supporting act to the center of the world, especially when children are very, very young and need a lot of care and attention. Your partner will be very focused on them. And right now you take it very much for granted that you can roll out of bed whenever you want and go for a breakfast somewhere, and you can change your mind about something, and you can just simply jump on a plane and go on holiday. Once you've got kids, all of that is logistics, and you find yourself with nannies, bigger house, bigger car, logistics, all of that stuff starts to. So it's a different life. It's a very good life. It's lovely, and I recommend it. I think life moves in chapters, and I had an amazing chapter in my 20s, which was the globe-trotting entrepreneur, making millions and running team and partying and all of that sort of stuff. I had a different chapter in my 30s, building a global business as well. And, in my 30s, I wrote best-selling books. I spoke on big stages. I got paid tens of thousands of pounds to give a 1-hour talk regularly. I got to share the stage with my heroes like Richard Branson and people like that. Richard Branson follows me on Twitter, by the way. Right? Which is, he only follows a couple of people, and it's like that stuff. And then in my late 30s, early 40s, I'm now the family guy. So we've got the big house, and we spend a lot of time at the big house, and we go to the park, and we little things are big things. Getting on the swings is a big thing. Overcoming a fear of a dog that comes up and sniffs you is a big thing. So, that my whole world now revolves around this chapter, a very different chapter.
So what does, now that you're in this chapter, what does your work life look like?
So I live a fairly normal work life now. I have work-life balance. I arrived at that place. So I typically start my day at 9:30, and I finish my day around 5:30. And a lot of the time I have nothing to do during the day, so I might go out for lunch with my wife, and I'd often drop the kids at school and often pick them up from school. I might sit and play computer games with the kids and all of that sort of stuff. So I have a lot of that going on. So
how much do you care now at this point about making more money and like professional success, and like how?
So for me, making more money is more about the fact that I've acquired a set of skills, and I like using those skills, right? I'm really good at buying and selling companies, for example. I've done 7 acquisitions, I've done several exits. The cool thing with entrepreneurship is that it really starts getting going at 40, and you start getting really good at 40, and, your career goes from strength to strength after 40. I felt it was a little sad. Roger Federer, he just retired, and he has to retire because his body can't keep up with the demand of tennis. So the career ends at 40. Whereas entrepreneurs don't really get going statistically until their early 40s. So one of the things that I really enjoy is that now I've got a set of resources and team and data and skills that actually I can get a lot done in a fairly short space of time, right? Because now I've got the leverage. But when I think about making money, it's really, I don't think a lot about making money, but I do think a lot about leveraging that set of skills and creating fun things and having fun projects. I also love doing businesses in partnership with people. Especially I love doing partnerships like co-founding with slightly younger people, bringing them up in their entrepreneurial journey.
So it sounds like you're mostly motivated by like the enjoyment, the love of the craft, the infinite game that you're playing around like, hey, this business thing's cool. I like building and growing selling businesses. Let's do more of that.
My infinite game is to develop entrepreneurs who stand out, scale up, and make a positive impact. That's my infinite game. So I do that through my accelerator programs. We develop entrepreneurs who stand out, scale up, and have purpose at the heart of their business. And we've done that with 3,500 companies around the world now. ScoreApp is a piece of technology that solves the number one problem that people have, which is the lead generation problem. So it allows them to stand out, scale up, and start making a difference. On my accelerators, I often put heads of social charities and change projects and put them through. And I do one-to-one coaching with people who could be a key person of influence in a way that really changes the world. So yeah, look, I have a bunch of fun because if you have a set of skills, you want to use those skills. It feels right that you're drawn to use those skills because it's like, if you're a ballroom dancer and you're really good at dancing, you want to dance. If you're a guitarist and you're really good at guitar, you want to pick up the guitar and play. So if you're an entrepreneur and you start figuring out how this crazy world of entrepreneurship actually works, you want to talk about it. You want to do it. You want to buy and sell stuff. You want to scale stuff.
Yeah, one of my coaches asked a few weeks ago, he asked me, the thought experiment of what would life look like if I just was not allowed to create anything on the internet for the next 2 years. And I was like, okay, fair enough. I guess I do loads of reading, get into philosophy and economics and politics. I'm interested in reading all that kind of stuff. And then when the 2-year market is up, then I can distill all that stuff. And that would be super fun. And then he was like, okay, what if you're not allowed to do anything on the internet, any kind of teaching on the internet for the rest of your life? I was like, oh damn, I'd be really depressed. I guess I don't know, try and do it in real, teaching in real life and host lectures and stuff. But that made me realize that for me, the infinite game is teaching, learning cool stuff and teaching it.
Learning how life works, sharing it with others and helping improve their lives, right? Yeah. So that's who you are and that speaks to your identity and all of that. The risk can be that your strong suit can become overused. You can be a ballerina who dances until your feet bleed. So one thing that is a risk is when you discover how great life can be with fun, freedom, and flexibility built in, you often become very picky about your partner who you're going to settle down with and have kids with and all that sort of stuff. So therefore, you get a lot of people like Tim Ferriss, bless him, but he's notoriously single and footloose, fancy free, and not having kids and all that sort of stuff. Which is, I get it. It's kind of cool. I was that guy, right? But there can be this risk that you've got your life set up so well that you don't want to disrupt it with a partner or kids. So that can be where your winning strategy becomes your losing strategy.
Have you come across this book called The Second Mountain?
No, sounds like a cool book.
It's by David Brooks. The thesis is that in life there are two mountains. The first mountain is the mountain of success and status and financial success and doing all the stuff. And then you get to the summit and realize that that's not where lasting happiness is. Or you get chucked off the mountain by a health scare or someone dying or something like that. And you realize that there is a second mountain. And while the first mountain was the mountain of happiness, the second mountain is the mountain of joy. And while the first mountain was all about optimizing for freedom and fun and flexibility, the second mountain is all about actually, I really want to invest. I want to commit. I want to build a home. I want to give myself to a cause that I really care about. And, getting off that first mountain onto the second is people.
It's a great, I can relate to that. I think it's a great philosophy. And you don't want to just keep climbing up and down this same mountain. It's you're constantly searching for that new high of fun, freedom, flexibility. Because I see a lot of people, I'm in the space where I do come across a lot of people who have done that. But, I think that it's hard to say, because you only really kind of fall in love with your kids after they're born and after they're, I think it might be
once
different.
They're beyond a certain age or certain months.
I think too, maybe there's a difference between men and women. I think men don't necessarily naturally love the idea of kids, but once you have them, then it's like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah. Yeah, every dude I know who has kids has that kind of vibe. They're like, yeah, back in the day, we were talking to Gordon about this the other day. Yeah. Like, when people show you photos of their kids, you're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And then you get kids and then you start showing people photos of your kids.
You become that dad. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I think it's important to have the second mountain, and the other thing too is, so I have a friend of mine sold a company for 900 million, right? And nice. Cash. Yeah. And has gone on to build several more businesses. And I totally understand, and they're worth hundreds of millions. I totally understand, and he's also my age, right? I get that he's got this incredible, unique set of skills for building extremely valuable businesses, but hasn't at all gone for the second mountain. And he's all about optimizing businesses and optimizing teams and building another $100 million company. But I sit there with my family and I think I'm actually really happy I'm on this second mountain. My first mountain's going quite well, but I get more joy from the second one.
Amazing. Dan, thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. I will put links to all of the books in the video description, in the show notes. Any final asks of our viewers or listeners?
The final ask is this. My mentor said to me, Daniel, don't watch the news. You live in the most incredible time. You couldn't have been born at a better time. This is an amazing moment in history. Don't ruin it by looking at all the horrible things that happened today. So ask number one is see if you can tune out from the news and spend more time doing positive things, and see if you can tune into the fact that the world is actually a really amazing place right now, and that there's so many great things that you can be doing, and there's so many great opportunities, and that the world is a big positive place. Think about if all of humanity got to vote what you should be doing with this amazing life that you've got, what would they want you to do based upon, if they could observe you and see, what would they want you to do? I think it's an incredible time to be an entrepreneur. There's more money than ever before. There's more talented people. There's more technology. This is an incredible time to be an entrepreneur. So, study it, learn it, get some mentors, get some people around you and go for it. This is the moment.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
All right, so that's it for this week's episode of Deep Dive. Thank you so much for watching or listening. All the links and resources that we mentioned in the podcast are going to be linked down in the video description or in the show notes, depending on where you're watching or listening to this. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, then do please leave us a review on the iTunes store. It really helps other people discover the podcast. Or if you're watching this in full HD or 4K on YouTube, then you can leave a comment down below and ask any questions or any insights or any thoughts about the episode. That would be awesome. And if you enjoyed this episode, you might like to check out this episode here as well, which links in with some of the stuff that we talked about in the episode. So thanks for watching. Do hit the subscribe button if you aren't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
We were in deep trouble at Netflix. And we had losses of about $50 million. We have got to sell this sucker fast.
Mark Randolph is an American tech entrepreneur, the co-founder and first CEO of Netflix. With a career spanning numerous startups and ventures, Mark's expertise in innovation, leadership, and business strategy is unparalleled.
August 1997, Netflix was founded.
Yes, and the reality is the idea was ridiculous. It didn't work. Nobody would rent DVDs by mail. But with over 40 years of being an entrepreneur, I've learned every idea is bad. We just don't know why they're bad yet. The important thing is how clever can you be to come up with a quick and cheap way to test it. For example, we thought, let's just have a subscription and no late fees. It was a ridiculous idea, but when we tested it, people loved it.
The Netflix DVD service has changed the world.
You explored selling Netflix to Amazon 2 years after you'd launched.
For probably $10 to $15 million. That's not a bad return for 12 to 18 months work. But I thought it was much more interesting to take the shot and see what Netflix could become. But all of a sudden, in a matter of a week or two, in spring of 2000, we were going to go broke being successful. We tried going to Blockbuster for months, but they weren't going to save us. They were going to compete with us. Netflix wouldn't have survived. But there's a story which has not really been told, which took one of Netflix's biggest impediments and turned it into one of its biggest assets. So
The Diary of a CEO raffle is about to close. Anyone that subscribes to the Diary of a CEO before we hit 7 million subscribers, which is probably going to be in a couple of days' time, you will be included in the raffle. And on the day we hit 7 million subscribers, we are giving away a lot of money can't buy prizes to all of you. So hit the subscribe button, get in before 7 million, and I'll announce the prizes and the winners in the comments below when we hit 7 million subscribers. In this season of your life, if you could consolidate your mission and the work that you're doing across the content you produce, the people you speak to, your professional endeavors, if you could consolidate that into a singular, focused mission, what exactly would that mission be in this season of your life?
For me, at this point in my life, it's all about mentorship. I've done 7 startups. I kind of recognized quite a while ago, I do not have the appetite to do another one. It's that 7x24 focus that I don't want to do anymore. I have other things that I would love to have spending time on, but you can't turn it off. I've also realized that over 40 years of being an entrepreneur, I've learned a few things about how to actually play this game. And so my mission now is, how do I pay that forward? How do I help other people either have a shot at it like I did, or if they're already playing the game, how do I try and increase their odds of success?
You wrote this book called That Will Never Work. Why? Books are painful and hard to write. What is it that you want someone who gets to the end of this book to walk away with?
I've come to believe that almost all of the information that people receive from the general media about entrepreneurship is wrong. It glorifies entrepreneurship in what I think is a damaging way. You watch these movies that are about entrepreneurship, and it's all about driving around in the fast cars and having the parties. And that's not it. It's a very lonely profession. So in a simple answer, the reason I wrote the book is I wanted to give people a true story of what it really means to come up with a crazy idea that everyone thinks is never going to work, and the struggle to make it real. And if someone reads that book and gets to the end and goes, this sounds great, then that's exactly the right person who should be an entrepreneur. If someone goes, this sounds a lot harder than I expected, well, then I've done a service in that way as well, which is I've kept someone from getting into this for all the wrong reasons.
When you look back on your journey to Netflix, I remember hearing Steve Jobs speak about the decisions he made in hindsight that when he reflects on his life resulted in him starting Apple and the decisions he made within Apple. So obviously, things he's famous for saying is that he went to a typography class, he dropped in and he started learning about design and typography, and that shaped him. What are those early sort of experiences that in hindsight fed into the creation of Netflix?
Probably the meta thing was the fact that most of these endeavors were entrepreneurial. So, for example, initially, my first foray into direct response marketing was when I asked if I could run the mail order division of this sheet music company that I was working for. And so what it meant to run the mail order division was every day you got the mail, and if you found someone's asking for a list of great songbooks, you'd make a copy and you'd mail it out. And then if an order came in, you'd go to the warehouse and pick, pack, and ship it. And that spoke to me, and I began experimenting and said, okay, now what happens if I do 2 pages or do it in color? What happens if I mail it out? And I built this mail order division into a real mail order company. So it was this combination of direct response, but more importantly, it was building something. It was creating a company inside a company. So there are certainly those preparations. From the direct response side, hugely formative for at least Netflix. Because if you think about it, what direct response marketing is all about testing. It's all about analytics. And when the internet came along and I saw what the internet was, what immediately popped in my head was, oh my gosh, this is the power to do direct marketing, but on steroids. This is so much more positive. I'm doing this personalization, but it's very brute force personalization. I mean, it's dear Stephen, wouldn't your friends at 17 Crescent Circle? It's like this ridiculous personalization. What the internet let me do is personalize every web page for one person. But one of the direct response endeavors that I did was I was a circulation director for a magazine. We launched a magazine, and that's subscription. And so you go, okay, well, look at this. You have someone who's doing direct marketing, and there's someone who's doing subscription. And then all of a sudden, they're trying to figure out how to do video rental better. It's not that big of a leap to say, okay, it was subscription and it was direct response on the internet. So yeah, these things were pretty formative.
So interesting. So you, on one hand, you had this business where you were physically sending things in the post, and then you got involved in another business where you were doing subscriptions, and these kind of, I guess, plant these sort of seeds in your brain to industries that you start to understand. And it's funny because when people think about creativity, I heard someone say before that creativity is essentially collecting lots of different clouds and then connecting them in new ways. So getting lots of different points of inspiration in life and then connecting them in new ways which create a new thing. And that kind of sounds like what you're describing there.
It is. And the thing is, at the time, you don't necessarily know. You're in the right place at the right time, because I certainly wasn't the only person who said, wow, the internet could be a powerful force for selling things. Mm-hmm. Jeff Bezos was one of the first people to recognize the power it could have to sell things when did Amazon, which at the time was only books. But there were a lot of different models we could have looked at. And so in terms of Netflix going into video rental and doing video rental by mail, that was entirely driven by the fact that I had worked for so long in a catalog business where I had mailed things in boxes, and I knew a lot about all the shippers, and I knew a lot about fast shipping. I mean, I had this huge repository of information and experience, and I didn't know how it would be used. But all of a sudden you're looking at a problem and you're kind of in your mind going through how could I possibly solve this in different ways. And one of the things that comes up is something you've experienced in the past.
You launched this company, Integrity QA, between sort of 96 and 7, and that's ultimately acquired by Reed Hastings.
By Pure Atria, by Reed Hastings' company, yes.
And that's where you and Reed Hastings met?
Yes, correct.
Who's the other co-founder of Netflix. What was that like? That first meeting with Reed Hastings?
Meeting Reed was like this instant junction of two like minds. We both recognized something in each other. One is that we both approached problems very differently. I was very emotional about it. I don't mean emotional like I'm running crying from the room. I mean empathy, that I'm a marketing person. When I put something out there, I can almost intuitively sense how someone's going to respond. Reed, his background is mathematics and computer science, much more logical, much more methodical. And we kind of realized as we began solving problems together how well those two integrated. But at the same time as having these differences in approaches, we were very similar in that we both shared this commitment to honesty. Not because we both swore an oath, it just was our nature that life was too short to shade the truth. That if you had something to say, you say it. And you say it in a respectful way, in an empathetic way, and you don't have ulterior motives. And we both were like that. And it allowed us to have these really intense, interesting conversations where we were trying to find the truth out of something, but pushing each other and challenging each other. And it ended up being a very, very powerful way to solve problems. And we were only at Pure Atria together for 7 or 8 months. And then lightning happened to strike again, where Pure Atria was now being acquired. And this time, both Reed and I were going to lose our jobs. They already had a CEO. They already had a senior VP of worldwide marketing. So we were going to be out of a job. We had 6 months, and Reed was going to go back to school, get a higher degree in education. I was going to start my next company, and Reed wanted to keep a finger in the pie here, and we came to an agreement that I would start the company. He would be my angel investor, and he'd be my board chair, and all we needed was the business idea. And
all you needed was a business idea.
Exactly. And
only that.
Yeah, just that small manner of needing something to do. And thus began this process, which went on for months, of Reed and I kind of searching for a business idea. And we had a methodology, so don't think this is random. And Reed and I happened to live in the same town. We lived in Santa Cruz, California together. And we had gotten in the habit many months earlier of commuting to work together. And so once we knew we were selling the company, once we knew we were losing our jobs, we still were commuting to work. But now the conversation in the car shifted. And what would happen is Reed would pick me up at my house, and we'd barely be out of my driveway. And I'd go, okay, Reed, I've got one for you. Personalized shampoo. You're going to cut off a lock of your hair. You're going to mail it to us. And we're going to have a team of hair scientists who are going to formulate a custom blend, and people are going to subscribe to it. And the same thing would happen no matter what I pitched, is there'd be silence. Reed would be staring out the window, just steering the car. And you'd think he hadn't even heard me, but I knew that kind of behind that stoic face, all the calculations were taking place, like, the risk and reward and the costs and the benefits. And it might take 5 minutes, 10 minutes of silence, but then eventually he would turn to me and go, that will never work. And he would lay into me with all the reasons it's such a bad idea. But of course, I could come prepared, and I'd come right back at him with all the research I had done, all the reasons I was sure it was a good idea. And we would do one of these arguments all the way to the office, and if need be, all the way home. And until we either decided there was promise or no promise. And almost all of the time, there was very, very little promise in these ideas. But next day, I'd have another one. Like, okay, Reed, personalized pet food, custom sporting goods, vitamins. I mean, I pitched all those ideas. I pitched them one, video rental by mail. People are going to come to the website. They're going to pick out a movie. We're going to mail them the movie, and they'll keep it for a week, and then they'll mail it back. And at the time, though, this was 1996, 97, video rental, you may remember, it was on VHS cassettes. So they were too big and too heavy and too expensive. And so that idea got trashed exactly the same way that the dog food and the personalized shampoo did, and kept on searching. And then the breakthrough, if there was one, came one morning where Reed picked me up, and I'm on my way out the door, out the driveway. I got one for you. And he stops me and goes, I got to tell you about something I read about. There's this technology that came out. It's called the DVD. It's this little disc that holds a movie, and it's thin and it's light. And we brainstormed that a little bit and realized this could be the unlock for that old video rental by mail idea we had talked about 6 or 8 weeks ago. And then we did this quintessentially entrepreneurial thing, which is mid-commute, we turned the car around and drove the car back into Santa Cruz to try and validate this idea. We did not go to the office and do a business plan. We did not work on a pitch deck. We tried to collide the idea with real people.
That day,
mid-commute, turned the car around, went down into Santa Cruz, tried to buy a DVD, couldn't find one, settled for buying a used music CD, same size, same weight, then went 2 doors down and bought a little envelope like you'd put a greeting card in, and put this CD in the envelope, addressed it to Reed's house, bought a stamp, and dropped it in the mail and went to work. And that very next morning when Reed picked me up, he held up a little pink envelope with an unbroken CD in it that had gotten to his house in less than 24 hours for the price of a stamp. And that was probably the moment we said, this actually might work. We can use the post office. And that shifted everything. And that's the point we began saying, this could be the idea that we do together.
So many entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs are at that exact phase where they want to leave their corporate job. Their brain, everywhere they go now, because they've wired themselves to be looking for an idea, is finding lots of random ideas. Their dog will throw up and they'll be like, oh, new dog food or whatever. And they're going through that process. And I think it's so important to just pause there and try and interrogate what the framework is for knowing if you've got a winner or not. Like how did you, because presumably you had got yourself passionate about the shampoo idea. So like, how do you know when to drop an idea and how do you know when to commit to an idea? What was the framework you're using?
The framework is that every idea is stupid. There's everyone, listen, you probably haven't had a corporate job yet in your
No, thank God.
Yes, thank God is right. Because there's this thing in corporate, I would say corporate America, but corporate world, and it's the brainstorming session. And they put everyone in a conference room and they go, we're going to brainstorm and try and come up with an idea for whatever it is. And he goes, but first, some ground rules for the brainstorming. Rule number 1, there is no such thing as a bad idea. And I call bullshit. There's plenty of bad ideas. In fact, there's no such thing as a good idea. Every idea is bad. We just don't know why they're bad yet. And so the framework I approach, I assume all these ideas are ridiculous. I assume none of them are going to work. But here's the difference. The reason I start from that position is I don't want to commit the single worst thing you can do as an entrepreneur, which is fall in love with your idea. And you've talked about the person who sees the dog throwing up and they go, I've got a great idea. And then what happens? Nothing. They go home and they go, this is a great idea. And they tell their partner and their partner goes, oh, that's brilliant. I'd buy that. And so they go, okay. And they begin working on a business plan and they write this 10-page business plan and they're dreaming about how amazing it's going to be. Just think about when we have this line of, we can do cats too, and then giraffes. And, they've built this incredibly ornate business in their head, all based on this feeling that this must be a good idea. And you've got to nip that in the bud. And the way you nip it in the bud is you try, rather than dreaming how amazing this idea is, the first thing you think about, the only thing you think about is, how can I quickly, cheaply, and easily collide this idea with a real person and find out, is it in fact a good idea or a bad idea? How can I do some kind of hack that will allow me to quickly find out whether customers actually would want this or not? And almost always you build this quick, cheap, down and dirty, I don't mean minimal viable product. I mean unviable. Something you can quickly do, like turn the car around and mail a CD to yourself just to find out the basic premise of, can I actually use the US mail to send movies back and forth? Because if that had failed, well, great, on to the next one. And that's such a critical step. That's the framework that everyone has to have. It is not about having a good idea. Having ideas is easy and trivial. The important thing is, how clever can you be to come up with a quick and cheap and easy way to test it?
Why? Because I know you and me understand this, but I didn't understand this when I started my career. So I know that there's a lot of people listening right now that are probably right in the moment you've described. They've spent a year building up this thing in their bedroom. For anyone that can't see, he's got his head in his hands. They've spent a year in their bedroom building and working on this project. Why is that a terrible idea?
It's such a waste of time, because what happens is, two things happen. One is this idea becomes so large and ornate and complicated in your head that you go, okay, Mark, I need to get started. I need to raise $5 million because it's going to have to hire all these people to build this thing. And they're probably building absolutely the wrong thing. You can't just go ahead and based on what you think is going to happen. You've got to start from a position of real information. Listen, perhaps the cleanest way, since we have a bit of time, is to give you an example. I do a lot of work with university students. And I was meeting with a young woman who at the university, and she goes, okay, Mark, I've got this idea. What I want to do is peer-to-peer clothing sharing. In other words, I've got all this clothing in my closet that I never wear, or I don't wear very often. And I know my friends have a lot of clothing in their closet, and other friends have clothes in their closet. It would be great if we had this website and we could all post what we have and we could borrow each other's clothes. And I'm going, okay, that's interesting. What can I help you with? She goes, I'm trying to figure out, should I drop out of college to do this? How do I raise the money to hire a team to build this for me? And I went, whoa, slow down here. Okay, interesting idea. But let's figure out if we can come up with a quick and cheap and easy way to collide this idea with reality. And I said, do you have a piece of paper? She goes, yes, smartass. I'm a college student, a piece of paper. I go, great. All right, do you have a marker? She goes, I have a marker. Do you have a piece of tape? She goes, got a piece of tape. I go, all right, I want you to write on the piece of paper, would you like to borrow my clothes? Knock. And I want you to tape that to the outside of your dormitory room. And we're going to find out in the next 24 hours whether the very, very first principle behind your idea is real. Is anyone going to knock? Because if nobody knocks, well, you've learned something very important right there. This thing you think is so attractive might not be. But let's be optimistic. Let's assume a bunch of people knock. Great, you've learned something. But you're also going to learn the next thing, which is, are there problems with fit? Are there problems with style? Are the people who knock and look at your clothes actually going to want any of them? All right, let's be even more optimistic. Let's say they do find out ones they want to borrow. Well, you're going to find out the next piece. How do you feel when your favorite blouse comes back stained or torn? You're going to find out about the cost of doing dry cleaning. You're going to find out all of these things, and you're going to find out all of this with a piece of paper, a tape, and a marker. None of this raising money, dropping out of school, and doing any coding. You're going to do something very simple. Now, is this scalable? No. Is this repeatable? No. But that's fine. You're going to do it all with 3x5 cards or on a pad. You're going to do it manually, and you're going to start losing your mind. But when you finally get to the point where you are ready to go and maybe raise money or drop out of school, you're going to know what you're dropping out of school for. You're going to know what you're raising money for. You're going to be able to tell someone, here's my acquisition cost. Here's my lifetime value. Here's my CAC. You're going to know all of these metrics. You're going to know the complexity. You're going to have tried all these different things. You're going to know what demographic, and you found out all of that for nothing except for your time. That's what I mean by figure out some way to validation hack. And that is the key to being an entrepreneur. You have an idea, quickly, cheap and easy, test it, find out it's ridiculous, abandon it, go on to the next one.
It's funny because obviously I'm a Dragon on Dragon's Den, which is basically a show like Shark Tank where we see 100 pitches a year from entrepreneurs. And what I observe in some of those pitches, especially when they're a little bit early on and they haven't got product market fit quite yet, there hasn't been evidence that the market actually cares, is a huge amount of delusion. To the point that you could give someone some feedback, but because they've spent 1-2 years of their life and maybe mortgaged their house and invested it into this business, they're now in the sunk cost fallacy, which is that sort of cognitive bias where you've invested so much in something that you're basically defending your bad decision at all costs and you can't see the light of day. And that, my first business was the death of my first business. But for many entrepreneurs that I meet, it's quite clearly the death of them. Because if they don't have that humility, if they've got romantic, they can't take any feedback, which is a conflict with what they want to believe.
Steve, you're absolutely right. It is the single biggest reason that either they don't start because they've built this thing up in their head and it's so big and complex that to get started is almost impossible, or they are so far along they can't stop. It's tragic in a lot of ways. Which is why you have to start from the belief that your idea is a bad one, because that makes it easier to walk away from it as soon as you realize you were right. But what happens if you can get this discipline of taking your idea and immediately trying it is it almost always takes you in a new direction. Yes, your original idea was terrible, but oh my gosh, did you see how this person did? Let's try this. Oh, that doesn't work. Let's try this. And that is entrepreneurship. It is just leaping from the back of one alligator to the next. And those alligators just hop long enough before they sink or before they bite you and you jump to the next one.
I think I found two sort of species of entrepreneur, and the real distinction between them is how long they've been doing it. And one species of entrepreneur that I know, they care entirely about being right, which is their initial hypothesis being correct. And that's typically the young entrepreneur. And then the more seasoned entrepreneur cares entirely about being successful, regardless of whether it's via their initial hypothesis or not. They care entirely about like saving time and being successful, not being right. And I think it's interesting that tenure as an entrepreneur seems to determine which camp you sit in.
It's also your personality. Jumping back to our conversation earlier about what attracted Reed and I to each other was that both of us were in that camp that said, we don't care whose idea it was. We just care about getting to the right answer. And part of this culture that we had with each other and we built with other people was, you could argue like cats and dogs, and eventually you all arrive at what you think is the right way to go. And as soon as that happens, you all fall in behind, and no one says, I was right, I was wrong. And you don't even remember who was right and who was wrong. It's a big piece.
August 29, 1997, Netflix was founded by yourself and Reed Hastings. From that day onwards, did you know at the moment that Netflix was going to ever become what it went on to be? What were you thinking it was going to be?
I am completely astounded and amazed at the direction that Netflix has gone. Never in a million years could I have dreamed of the company that exists now being the same one that we were thinking about in August of 1997. It's astounding to me what's happened. And it's the nature of entrepreneurship. You can't predict where these things are going to go. That wasn't the point, though. It wasn't like Reed and I were in the car going, okay, when do we enter the streaming war? And how do we deal with China? No, this was a very, very simple, straightforward problem. Video rental in the United States is $8 billion a year. It's very unpleasant that the company who has the lion's share of that market is doing things which customers hate. There has to be a Blockbuster. There has to be a better way. That's where it starts from. That's the problem you're trying to solve. And trying to solve the problem is this dual thing, which is how do you do something that a customer might want, solve the problem for the customer, but also how do you make a business out of that? And that's all consuming. I remember we had a company meeting early on, maybe we were 2 or 3 months in. And I remember getting up in front of the company and laying out what I thought was going to be this big, hairy, audacious goal for us. Someday, we're going to be one of the top 10 largest video chains in the United States, which in retrospect was a ridiculously trivial. But from where we stood then, it may as well have been saying we're going to ride our bicycles up Mount Everest. What hubris. Because even the 10th largest chain was many, many, many millions of dollars a year bigger than we were at the time. But something to aim for, and we actually passed that one way faster than we thought. And then you set your goal, eventually we're going to be as big as Blockbuster. In other words, if you were to set your goals to be what Netflix is now, I would be locked up. I would have been this most ridiculous flight of fancy hallucination you can imagine.
They would have thought you had gone psychotic or something if you had ever done a presentation saying Netflix would be as big as it is now. You for people that don't know, because the world has moved on so much, and there's a generation of people that are listening to this conversation right now that probably don't even know what a VCR and a cassette player is. But you launched the business at a time when Blockbuster was the big incumbent, and Blockbuster was a store where you went to a physical location, you rented a cassette, VCR, what do they call it?
A VCR. VHS
tape. You took it home and then you brought it back the next day. And your real innovation was that you were going to send these DVDs to people in the post on a rental basis. That was the crux of the business, right?
That was the crux of the business. And in fact, when we originally started, there was not a lot of business model innovation there either. There was due dates and there was late fees. The innovation was one centralized store on the internet that served the entire country so that we could have every single movie that was available on DVD.